Well, good evening, everyone in Vacaville, and welcome to the meeting of the City of Vacaville Planning Commission for July 20th, 2021. Before we start in the formal agenda, I want to go through a script explaining how tonight's meeting is run. And we do appreciate everybody who's participating in tonight's teleconference meeting. We'll be conducting it pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N-08-21 and to our local policies. So please bear with us as we continue to use the remote tools. We know sometimes people participate that have not used those tools before, and we'll take as much time as we need to make sure that people have the chance to participate. Even that means we have some dead air while people are getting on. We'll take that opportunity. The Planning Commission meeting can be viewed live on the city's website, which is www.cityofvacaville.com, or on the local cable channel 26. And instructions to participate from a computer are provided at the city's website, and you can connect via the link that is listed on the agenda. If you're following along on the telephone and you're prompted for a participant ID, simply press the pound sign to be connected to the meeting. If you're planning on participating, please make sure you follow along on the telephone or on your computer. Don't follow on channel 26 because there is a broadcast delay. Callers who wish to comment can raise their hand by pressing *9. Depending upon their individual settings, they may then need to press *6 after the host unmutes you in order to open up your own microphone. And computer users requesting to speak can click the raise hand button at the bottom of their Zoom controls. Finally, a reminder that if you're speaking and unmute yourself, that's great, but when you're done speaking, please go ahead and remute yourself so we don't have background noise coming across. And with that, I will go on to item number 1 on our agenda, which is the roll call. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Chair McCauley.
Here.
Vice Chair Klein.
Here.
Commissioner Aldridge.
Here.
Beaumont.
Here.
Brecken.
Here.
Courtney.
Here.
And Lightfoot.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. If you would all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 3 on our agenda is communications. And I will note that we have the city manager here today, acting in the role of community development director after Mr. Baderi's retirement. So I will ask either the secretary or Mr. Bush, depending upon who has the information, if we have any communications.
We have no communication.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. Item number 4 is approval of the agenda as is presented, and I would like to note that that includes item 7A, the final environmental impact report for the transportation issues being continued to August 17th. So if we approve the agenda as it is, that item is automatically continued. Are there any proposals to change the agenda as it's presented? Seeing no hands raised on that, I will ask the secretary to call a roll for approval of the agenda as proposed.
Commissioners Aldridge.
Yes.
Beaumont.
Yes.
Brecken.
Yes.
Courtney.
Yeah.
Lightfoot.
Yes.
Vice Chair Klein.
Yes.
Chair McCauley.
Yes, the agenda is approved as proposed. Item number 5 is business from the floor. This is the time for members of the public to address the commission with issues that are not on the agenda for tonight, but that are within the commission's subject matter jurisdiction. We limit presentation to a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker or group spokesman pursuant to the state government code and to the Vacaville Municipal Code. With that, I'll go over to our list of public attendees and ask if any of those wish to indicate to bring something up from business from the floor. I don't see any indication, Madam. I do see someone with the last name of Lindquist has raised their hand, so let's go ahead and unmute them and allow them their chance to speak business from the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. Am I allowed to share a screen with a presentation?
I will ask you to make sure you work with the secretary on that so that that can be done. We won't start your 3 minutes until you've had the opportunity to share that screen. So Nancy, if you go ahead and...
Thank you. Well, it would be on my video.
Okay, that feature has been turned off for this evening.
Okay, so it sounds like there's not the ability to share the video.
I can. No, I meant my own person, like my video here. Me.
Right.
Mr. Chair, this is Acting Director Bush. Typically for something like that, we need to have advance notice so that we can be prepared for it, so that we can also screen it as well. So I regret that we're not in a position to accommodate that request tonight.
So we're not set up for that. So you can make whatever verbal comment you want, so long as it's within the standard business from the floor limits. But I'll go ahead and start your 3 minutes now, and you can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, I did have a visual presentation here that I was hoping to walk you through, because I came here tonight with an opportunity for the Planning Commission, and it's an opportunity of amnesty and to finally be transparent with the people of Vacaville, to reveal the Vacaville Planning Commission's secret agenda to create and manipulate California's drought. Based on the evidence I have obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, it has been clear that the Vacaville Planning Commission has been engaged in a secret plan to promote, endorse, and support large-scale urban development plans as a front or guise to hide the direct involvement in a secret plan to manipulate California's ecosystem by rerouting the state's natural water supply through a network of underground tunnels and pipes. We have seen very clearly from the projects such as the Lagoon Valley Business Village Downtown Specific Plan, Pier 40, and agreements buried in the Southtown Development Agreement amendments, such as the special water annexation fee, water annexation. It's very clear that the central location of Vacaville is being used to drain the state's lakes and reroute water to preferred farmers to promote certain crops while maintaining a power position. It's no coincidence that this is being effectuated by the current planning chair. Current, obviously, when anyone goes to the dictionary and looks up the meaning of current, the definition is a body of water or air moving in a definite direction, especially through a surrounding body of water or air in which there's less movement. We've already seen in the city that the Pile Addition and the Crossroads Youth Building have been used as the excavation sites to build and implement the infrastructure underneath the city to reroute the water away from the state's lakes. We can see an unusual amount of excavation, large-scale dump trucks, moving. It doesn't equate with the jobs that line up. And we can tell by the quality of the current water and the tap water thereof that we see clear pollutants that have no place in any construction. I urge any member of the Planning Commission to come forward with the transparency and truth for this one-time opportunity of amnesty to do right by the people of Vacaville. However,
that brings you right to the 3 minute limit that we place. So, and since this is only of, I would say, marginal application to our jurisdiction, I am going to hold to that 3 minutes on that. And I would encourage you, if you wish to further address the city, to speak to city manager staff about an opportunity to speak to the city council under their business from the floor if you feel you have a visual presentation. But that does reach the 3 minutes on that opportunity.
Thank you for the time.
I will ask if any other members of the public wish to address us under business from the floor. And I don't see any other hands up. I will ask the secretary if there are anyone on the phone who indicates that they wish to address the commission at this point.
There is no one.
Seeing none, I will go ahead and close item 5, business from the floor, and go on to item number 6, which is the consent calendar. The only item on the consent calendar is the minutes from our meeting of June 15th, 2021. Do any members of the commission have proposed amendments or changes to those minutes? Commissioner Aldrich, you've unmuted. You have changes?
No, I was going to move to approve. I'm sorry.
Okay, then I have a motion from Commissioner Aldrich to approve the consent calendar as proposed. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Vice Chair Klein. If the secretary would call the roll, please.
Commissioners Aldrich,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Brecken,
Yes.
Courtney,
Yes.
Lightfoot,
Yes.
Vice Chair Klein,
Yes.
Chair McCauley.
Yes, so the consent calendar is approved. We'll now move on to item number 7, which is business items. Again, 7A has been continued. 7B is the downtown specific plan with public comments, and it lists Tyra as the staff person making that presentation. Tyra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. With the Chair's permission, I'd just like to add one note regarding item 7A, our VMT project, which is being continued. Is it okay if I continue?
Well, since we continued that, I'd say let's just skip that because we've already taken an action to continue that item. And I don't want to be discussing something under Brown Act that we've already said we're moving on. So let's just go ahead with 7B.
Thank you very much. So tonight I bring before the Planning Commission the Downtown Specific Plan. Like many of our recent presentations, this is an informational presentation in which I do invite the Planning Commission to interact with anything you hear or see tonight, and please feel free to stop me at any time. Next slide, please. So as the Planning Commission may remember, the draft Downtown Specific Plan was published last month. And during last month, we had a 2-week public review and comment period, which ran from June 7th to June 18th. During this time, staff, as well as the city's Downtown Specific Plan consultant team, had given several informational presentations with the hopes of familiarizing both the Planning Commission, the Council, as well as the public about the project to help them better formulate any questions or provide any comments they may have regarding the project. In addition to those presentations, there was a recorded webinar that was held on June 9th. That recording is still available on the city's website. It can easily be found by going to cityofvacaville.com and simply searching Downtown Specific Plan. And in addition to that, we did have a handful of other small meetings, including meetings with our Downtown Business Improvement District and the Solano Transportation Authority Board of Supervisors. Next slide, please. So we did receive a handful of comments during the public review period, but before I share those with the Planning Commission, I would like to kind of back up a little bit and ask the Planning Commission to just think to themselves, have you ever thought what really makes a downtown interesting? Is it the stores, the restaurants, landscaping? Perhaps it's the people. There is no one answer, but I think we can all agree we've all been into downtowns we either found very charming and really kind of drew us back to visit again and again. And then there are those downtowns that don't really leave a memorable impression on us. One thing we have found throughout the duration of creating this downtown specific plan is that there is a factor or several factors that really do come up again and again in those lovely destination downtown. Next slide, please. And nowhere else in Vacaville is that more apparent than during our annual Merriment on Main celebration that does occur within our lovely downtown. So there's going to be a lot, or there is a lot to see on the photos in front of you, but I would like to take just a moment to kind of point out a few factors that you may have overlooked. I'm sorry, I did not remove the animations on this. So if you would, go ahead and click, please. Oh, okay. So if you take a look at the top picture, sorry, the other bullets are coming up. So if you take a look at the first picture, you can clearly see that the building on the right, which is the Opera House as we locals know it, you'll see that the windows are lit up. What that allows is it allows people to see into that business as well as the other businesses that were also lit up during the same time. This is something we call creating an active storefront. Active storefronts are those little factors that allow pedestrians to comfortably see into the stores. Those factors typically include large windows. Sometimes it'll include a display in the window. And during nighttime, it does include nice lighting, which again allows people to see into the business without actually having to go in. Now, the idea is you provide a nice display in that window, you allow the passing visitor to see in, they're more likely to visit your store. So as I mentioned, lighting is another big factor of what really lends itself to a destination, charming, warm downtown environment. Not only does it provide for safety aspects, but it also just helps provide for that sense of romanticism and just a sense of you're welcome there. So it can also be identified in these pictures, maybe a little to the extreme. In this case, this event was very pedestrian focused. During our Merriment on Main celebration, Main Street is closed off to any kind of vehicular traffic. Now, again, this is an extreme example, but it does go to show if you provide a safe pedestrian environment, you're more likely to have pedestrians visit your downtown and casually stroll through the streets, hopefully looking into those active windows and wanting to be part of the environment. So along with being pedestrian friendly, typically if something is more focused for pedestrians, people also feel that it's family friendly. They're more likely to feel comfortable walking with their children in tow. And lastly, when you have all these other factors mixed in, it kind of lends itself to a sense of community. You feel you belong. You feel like you're wanted and invited to come back and visit downtown over and over again. Next slide, please. So the reason I wanted to share that with you is the downtown specific plan as it currently exists does include several different projects that lends itself to all the things we just reviewed. The idea is we want to create a unique destination location that invites people to visit over and over again, whether you be a visitor from out of town or you're a resident who just finds that restaurant they want to become a regular at. So the first project I want to share with you, and this will lead into a couple of the comments we've received on our plan, is our proposed town center expansion. So on the screen, you see before you a Google image of our existing town square, which is located on Main Street. So you have Main Street just south of the square, which is shown in the blue square itself. Above that, you have, it's a little further north, but you have the library, and that goes north to East Monte Vista, and to the west, you have Dobbin Street. So as you can see, the square it's fairly small in nature, but luckily it is very well used. Before COVID-19, the city had a very fortunate problem. And that problem was our festivals and our outdoor events were so popular that Town Square was deemed to be too small. And we were looking for ways to improve that. Next slide, please. So here we have a street view of what Town Square currently looks like. So here you can kind of get an idea of the scale of the Town Square itself. So you have two-story buildings on each side of the square. And to the rear of the square, you have the Town Square parking lot. Town Square Library parking lot. So the square is really limited in size, and that does kind of restricts itself in terms of what uses and what festivals can occur in that location. As such, our downtown specific plan is proposing to expand those. Next slide, please. So here is a conceptual plan of what we are proposing as part of our downtown specific plan. So the street kind of running parallel to the bottom of your screen, that is Main Street. And you'll see that we have decorative concrete being shown on Main Street itself, and then extending back towards both the Town Square Library as well as the Senior Center. And those little white buildings you see are potentially future mixed-use buildings. Now, one thing I'd like to mention here is, even though we are proposing to put decorative concrete on Main Street would be open to vehicular traffic. The idea behind putting the decorative concrete on Main Street itself is to denote a specific town center in which there are several civic uses, and we want to alert those drivers that they are entering an area where there is a higher intensity of pedestrians in the area, and we do encourage them to slow down. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, this is a large project, and therefore we are proposing to build it in phases. The plan before you now is the Town Center Expansion Conceptual Plan as we see it in the short term. Now, short term could mean 5 years from now, it can be 10 years, but it would be the first phase of this proposal. So on the left, you have a map of the conceptual plan showing the town center expansion as we had noted. Again, the street running parallel to the bottom of your screen is Main Street, and you can see the decorative concrete being proposed across it. To the north, you see that decorative concrete being extended towards the Town Square Library as well as the Senior Center itself. And ultimately, that area would terminate along the creek, in which at some point in time, we would hope to create another creek walk along that side of the creek. Now, one thing you did not see in the previous picture is, as part of this conceptual plan, we were also proposing to install decorative concrete along the part of Merchant Street that runs from Dobbin Street to Main Street. Now, if you're aware of this area, it is a one-way street that does connect Merchant Street to Main Street, and there are a handful of parking stalls along the street itself. In years past, we have temporarily closed this section of the street in order to allow for street festivals to occur, which were successful. So with that in mind, we thought perhaps we should extend Town Center to include this section as well. Now, as proposed and as shown on your screen, we were showing this area to be closed off to vehicular traffic and the removal of those parking spaces. Since we originally published this plan in 2019, we have heard from some of the property owners and business owners along that stretch of Merchant Street, and they have expressed some concern about either removing the parking and closing that section of Merchant Street off to vehicular traffic. One commenter on our draft specific plan had noted that they found that when we temporarily closed that portion of the street during 2020, that resulted in detrimental impacts to her business. So she did request that we carefully consider not closing that street when we do the first phase of our town center expansion. What I had noted to her, as well as another like-minded commenter, is this is a conceptual plan, and therefore there will be additional planning necessary to come up with the ultimate design that should be constructed. As part of that process, this plan will be subject to future public input as well as public hearings. But I did want to share that comment. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Do we have an idea of what the magnitude of that impact? Was it 5%, 25%, 50% reduction in business? Do we know?
I honestly do not. The one thing I would ask the Planning Commission to consider is, even if we had a rough number, that occurred during COVID. So I do believe most of the businesses within downtown were impacted one way or the other. So again, I wanted to share these comments with the Planning Commission because they are comments that should be considered, and they will be considered as we move forward with any plans to construct these improvements. On the right of your screen, you see an example of what some of these improvements could look like as part of the first phase of the improvements. So we have a picture of Parsons Valley, which is located in Duluth, Georgia. You'll see a very similar concrete patterned area on the street, which then leads into a town center, very similar to what we are proposing as part of this project. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this is a very large project, and therefore we are proposing it as a phased project. Here we have the same town center expansion conceptual plan, but this is the long-term plan. So everything you saw on the previous slide is being shown on the picture to your left, but we've expanded it. So from here, we will build upon the decorative concrete, and we would be adding things such as landscaping, art installations, and probably most importantly, we are proposing to allow for mixed-use businesses to go into this area. And the only way that can be accommodated is to remove the existing surface parking lot, which is currently located in front of the town square library. That said, if you look closely at this map, we do note that the future mixed-use buildings would be required to provide a parking structure. Now, that parking structure could be a standalone building, or it could be incorporated into the individual buildings themselves. That, again, will be something subject to further consideration and discussion as we move forward into the planning and construction stages of these improvements. Next slide, please. So another commenter was looking at our plan, and overall, she was very pleased with what we were proposing. She had noted that she would love to see very interesting and artistic wayfinding signage within downtown to help both motorists as well as pedestrians to find the uses within downtown itself. She also noted the need to improve some of the existing landscaping. Here you see a handful of pictures. Most of these are directly out of our downtown specific plan. And one idea I thought was kind of exciting, and I wanted to point out to our planning commission, is the idea of creating pedestrian signage. So in the lower left-hand side of your slide, you see a pedestrian-oriented signage structure. So under this idea, the city would put in the structure that would allow various businesses to buy their own little placards to install on this plan, in which would identify the building itself or the business itself, and let people know it's only one block over or maybe 2 blocks to the left. Now, I have had very preliminary discussions with both our Public Works Division as well as the Downtown Business Improvement District, and everyone loves this idea. Conceptually, if this were to move forward, what would happen is Public Works has agreed to install the actual structure within the public right-of-way, but then the Downtown Business Improvement District would be in charge of charging and installing the individual placards to assure that they're always up to date. So here we kind of see it as a win-win situation. Our Business Improvement District would receive a little bit of funding to help improve other areas of our downtown, and our existing and future businesses can have a little additional marketing and advertising for their businesses. Next slide, please. So we did receive a handful of other comments. Some of these we have heard throughout the duration of our downtown specific plan. One person mentioned that they were not very happy with the temporary outdoor seating arrangements. Specifically, they did not like what we call the K-rails, or the traffic barriers that are currently located along Main Street and I believe along Merchant Street. This commenter was informed that these were temporary and that the city is currently working with the city council to identify potential parklets to be installed along Main Street, and they would be permanent in nature. We had another person who thought we should model our downtown based on downtown Winters. No disrespect to Winters. They've done a wonderful job with their downtown, but we are looking to create a very unique Vacaville downtown, and the downtown specific plan has tons of ideas on how we can do that. Let's see. There was another commenter who brought up a very valid point. They were asking whether or not the city would consider incentive programs to entice existing property owners to perhaps relocate to other portions of downtown if they have businesses along Main Street which really don't lend themselves to bringing visitors and residents downtown, uses such as restaurants or perhaps boutique retail. And of course, I'm sure this is no surprise to any of the planning commissioners, there was a concern about any potential reduction of parking within downtown. So with that kind of concludes the comments we'd received. I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to let the planning commission and or the public who may be listening to let me know if there's anything you would like me to revisit regarding the downtown specific plan at next month's meeting. I am more than happy to discuss any topic you think we need to revisit prior to the tentatively scheduled adoption hearing that will occur later this fall. So in case anyone did not have the opportunity to review the plan itself is still available for review online. I will still take any comments anyone may have on the plan. You can either go to the address shown on the screen. It's just a little bit.ly web address, or you can simply go to the cityofvacaville.com website and search downtown specific plan. I've also provided my contact information on the slide if anyone would like to contact me. I am more than happy to discuss the plan itself. That concludes my presentation, and I would love to hear any thoughts the Planning Commission and or the public may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyra, for that presentation. I see Commissioner Lightfoot has raised his hand. So, Ralph, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tyra. I really like your overall concept and plan. The one thing that has been sticking out for me a little bit is the senior center and library, and kind of incorporated into an area that's no longer used in the same way as its surroundings.
Okay, Commissioner, just a sec. I'm getting background noise, almost sounds like kitchen pots and pans clanking around. So if you're not the person who's speaking, if you could go ahead and mute yourself. I'm sorry, Commissioner Lightfoot, go ahead.
So my question is, has the long-term plan for the senior center or library been questioned or been thought about? Is it possible to relocate or anything of that sort?
I've not heard anything about potentially relocating the Town Square Library that is owned and operated by Solano County itself. That said, there has been some very tentative and preliminary discussions about potentially relocating the senior center in the future. But it's my understanding if that were to occur, it'd be many years into the future. So with that said, the idea with our town center expansion was to create more of a civic center in addition to creating a city or citywide community gathering space. So in another way, we're trying to make the overall area, including these two uses, more relevant to downtown.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Lightfoot?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have questions of Tyra or comments they'd like to make at this time? And Tyra, I'm guessing that one of the things you should definitely emphasize when you do bring this back next time is on parking, just where parking is right now and any changes that would be made. That seems to be one of the most consistent issues that is brought up. I see Commissioner Brecken has raised her hand. So Wendy, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Wendy Brecken. Tara, I really want to thank you and everybody else who's worked on this downtown plan. I especially like the long-term, thinking and, make it somewhere that's attractive that everybody wants to go. I kind of agree with some of the commenters of the public, because I'm a member of the public too. And I was just down to downtown to go to a restaurant on Friday night at the same time the Creek Walk was going on. And Journey Coffee had a concert, and I was like literally stressing out that we weren't going to find parking. So, I know we need to take away some of these spaces for parklets and for other things. And I just, to the extent that we can make it a priority to get the garage in sooner. And I was unclear on where you wanted to put the parking garage. Was that going to be one of those white buildings in your picture? I know the city's relying on the Hickory Lot, which has like 250 spaces, but that's far, far away, like past Brennen Theaters over by 80, and nobody thinks that that's downtown. So I don't think I would never think to park there if I'm going to go to a downtown restaurant. And certainly if you have young kids, it would be difficult to go from the Hickory Lot to downtown. I mean, I think the lack of parking is going to cause people to skip downtown and just go other places. So for me, it's urgent to get the garage happening sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Tyra, anything you want on reply to that?
I do. Thank you very much. So what I'm hearing, and please correct me if my understanding is incorrect, would you like a complete review of our parking study and our parking strategy at the next month's meeting?
I'm not sure that it's a complete review so much as it is that we know this is an important issue. So a good summary of what's being looked at, what areas are used at what time, and what the city's overall strategy is. I think, I know Commissioner Beaumont has brought this up before. Commissioner Brecken just expressed her concern. The public has. I think it's probably the item that has the most public interest and certainly should be reviewed at whatever your presentation is next month. Wendy, did that kind of cover what you were thinking of for a presentation next time?
Yeah, I'm not sure about a complete review. I don't know what, I mean, I skimmed the parking study that was done. And I mean, that's what I was looking at, is that map. And I understand that you want signs and such to, find places to go to parking areas, but my concern is that if there's a way to push the parking garage sooner rather than, long-term, whatever long-term means. And also, did you have a place in mind for that garage?
And I also see the city manager has his hand up, and so I'm going to go to him and then Commissioner Beaumont after that. City manager, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. And I can be happy to wait for Commissioner Beaumont's comments, but specifically to the question about the parking structure. So we'll be happy to provide the commission with an update about the overall parking numbers, the potential impacts upon parking, with some of the visions that we have for attracting new features downtown. I will just share with you now that the parking structure, as it stands now, based on the numerical values, when you look at the parking analysis, there's not a demand for structure right now. And parking structure is generally in the neighborhood of 300 to 600% more expensive than surface parking. And so there would really have to be an overall need for such a facility or structure before we would explore investing in something like that. So that's why, as Tyra pointed out, that when you look at the short-term versus the long-term plan, that it really doesn't start to show a need for such a facility until the long-term plan, because of the additional infill development that's proposed or shown with that particular plan. As it stands now, without the addition of a lot of new development and infill structures in the town plaza area, I would suggest that there's really not an immediate need for such an expensive facility. But we can elaborate on that more at our next meeting and give you some more of the details behind the numbers.
Great, thank you very much. I see Commissioner Beaumont's hand is up, so I'm going to give the floor to Doug. Wendy, your hand is still up. Okay, it's down, so we're good. Doug, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Tyra, I was not going to bring this up, but since Wendy did, I've objected to that Hickory Lot all along. I think it's 243 spaces that you attribute to downtown that no one that I know of will ever use. So to me, I would love to see what the parking lot numbers look like without the Hickory Lot and see if we really do have a problem downtown if that Hickory Lot is not included. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Beaumont. Tyra, anything you want to add into that? And then once you're done, I see Commissioner Klein's hand is up. So Tyra, you have the floor, and then on to Brandon.
Thank you. I am more than happy to share the parking numbers with the Planning Commission with the removal of the Hickory Parking Lot. But since the Hickory Parking Lot keeps coming up, I'd like to just take a brief moment to explain why it's included. I agree with everyone that as downtown exists today, most people would not park in the Hickory lot and go downtown unless they were going to Brennen Theatre. Now that said, this is a long-term plan. Depending on what occurs along Davis Street, which has been identified as one of our major gateways into our downtown, there may be quite a bit of redevelopment in that area. And therefore, we thought it was important to include the Hickory lot because at some point in time, it may serve as the primary parking location for future uses. So I just wanted to include that as well. But to that point, I will come back to our Planning Commission next month, and I will include the parking information with the removal of the Hickory parking lot.
Thanks, Tyra. Commissioner Klein had his hand up, and then we'll go back to Commissioner Beaumont. Brandon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Tyra, for the terrific presentation. And I commend you on all the work that's gone into it. I know this has been a long time coming. I am a little concerned about the schools and the outreach component as well. I commend you guys on reaching out to the high school students and getting their input on how they would spend their parents' money downtown. But the larger issue is the capacity question. And I know that, you know, you've got 733 additional units coming in here, and that will bring in approximately 513 additional students spread throughout each of the levels. And just looking at the numbers on some of the elementary schools, for example, Hemlock, I don't know how you would split a school like Hemlock in terms of the capacity that has two different programs there. And the other issue, or the wider issue, is that what would the school district say? And what does capacity really mean in this context? If you're just looking at the Hemlock School and you're talking about a slack capacity of 100 students, what does that really mean in terms of an elementary school and the sort of teacher to student ratio that we're trying to achieve here in Vacaville? So I'd like to see some outreach to the school district. I'd like to know whether or not they agree with the assumptions that were made in the draft report. And I'd like to see what their response is to whether or not there truly is capacity spread out all throughout those impacted schools without building another school. Because the way that the draft plan is written, it seems as though the assumption is that this is kind of the school's problem to deal with the potential impacts of transporting students to existing facilities. So I think that moving forward, it would be nice to know that we're truly doing collaborative planning with the city, between the city and the school district, and to have some of these important questions addressed before we approve these projects.
Ira, go ahead, and you have an opportunity to respond. And again, I'll invite, since this is intergovernmental actions, this might be something the city manager would also like to chime in on. And since Mr. Bush has raised his hand, I think I'll go to Aaron first. So Aaron, you have the floor right now.
I appreciate that, Chairman, but please feel free to take everybody else first before me. That's absolutely fine. But with regards to the interagency coordination, Vice Chair Klein, you're absolutely correct. And I think you'll actually see it in our next presentation in terms of the land use process. We touch on that very subject. We do not do anything related to project approvals here at the city in a vacuum. We are mandated by law, mandated by our own code to reach out to other involved agencies. And it's just good business practice, honestly, to work with our neighbors and our cohorts at other agencies, and especially the school district, to make sure that what we're putting forward is a good design and a good plan that benefits the overall community. So I assure you that through the downtown specific plan process and every other planning project that we manage here, we reach out to all the appropriate folks. We reach out to all the stakeholders and neighbor groups to make sure that we're getting all the comments that we need. You will see that when it comes time with the downtown specific plan itself, the environmental evaluation will make sure that we share with you that we have reached out to the school district. We have asked them for what they believe the impacts of the project will be, the potential impacts, I should say. They are the subject matter experts, and we need their input. And so that will be all handled as part of the formal adoption of the environmental document and the formal adoption of the downtown plan itself. So I hope that answers your questions. And again, we'll be talking about that in a little bit more detail on the next presentation following this one. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll let Commissioner Klein finish up. I'll go back to Tyra, and then Commissioner Beaumont's hand is up. But Commissioner Klein, you still have the floor.
Thank you for that, Aaron. What I'm responding to specifically is the 4 references on page 11 to the outreach that was made to the council, the Solano Transportation Authority, the commission, and others. And I think that for me, the glaring omission is the school district. Attending a school board, giving a presentation. I certainly understand that there's everything you've said is an indicator of excellence in planning if you're coordinating. But I would like to see a specific opportunity to put the school district on the spot about whether or not they intend to build a school or what their plan is. And so if that involves us writing a letter asking for a specific response to a capacity question, or if that's attending these meetings like we've done with the Transportation Authority and the council, then those are the things that I'm talking about.
Tyra, I'll return the floor to you, and then we'll go to Commissioner Beaumont, and then see who else has anything. So Tyra, you have the floor. And Commissioner Klein, your hand is still up. If you don't have more, I'd ask you to go ahead and drop it. Tyra, go ahead.
To add on to what City Manager Bush had noted, he is absolutely right. We do work very well with other agencies within our community. And I'd like to note that Dan Banowitz, the facility manager for Vacaville Unified School District, is on what we call our technical advisory committee for this project. And he has been involved in the project from the very beginning. He was provided a copy of the administrative draft of the document and did provide comments on it. The capacity numbers you see within the document came directly from him. In addition to reviewing the administrative draft, he was also sent the public draft, which you have before you. So at that point in time, he did not comment further. I did ask him at one point in time, following up on another question I had received, what constituted capacity. And in terms of Vacaville Unified School District, they define capacity as room within the actual classrooms. So everything you see, it talks about capacity. They're talking about how many students they can fit in the individual classrooms themselves. Now that said, I can make a request that either they submit a letter, stating their position on the plan, and or they attend the next meeting.
Thanks. I'm going to give the floor to Commissioner Beaumont, and then back to Commissioner Klein, because it looks like he wants to do some follow-up. Doug, you have the floor.
Thank you. Tyra, just back to the Hickory Lot real quick. I would agree with you that when and if the Davis Street is upgraded for pedestrian and bike traffic, the Hickory Lot should be included in downtown. But until the time that Davis Street is actually under improvement, I would say that it should not be included in the downtown. Just my opinion. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Klein, did you have a follow-up you'd like to make? And then I'll go ahead and give it back to any other commissioners that want to participate.
just briefly, I would like to see attending a school district governing board meeting and giving a presentation. This is a terrific presentation. We should be sharing it widely. And I would also like to see maybe the commission explore a process of communicating with the school district through letters to see whether or not they concur specifically with whether or not there needs to be a school built with some of these approvals. Thank you.
Do we have other commissioners that have comments they'd like to make or questions they'd like to ask at this time? I see Commissioner Aldrich has unmuted, but still doesn't know how to raise her hand, but the unmute does it. Jan, go ahead.
I remember at one point we talked about on special events downtown from the outlying lots, we may engage golf carts or some kinds of public transportation type thing to bring people closer into the downtown that would be parking perhaps in the Hickory lot. And then the other question I have is, was not the Hickory lot at one time designated for an expansion of the Brennen Theatre for a dinner theater venue? And has that gone by the wayside, or what's the status on that?
Ira, any input on that?
I can address a part of it. So there was a proposal to create a new or construct a new Brennen Theatre that's more of that dinner and dine kind of concept. However, that was being proposed in the parking lot next to the existing theater, in between the theater itself, as well as the ice skating rink. It was not being proposed within the Hickory lot itself.
Okay.
To my knowledge, that project has expired, and unfortunately, I don't know whether or not Brennen Theatre has any plans to resurrect that project. In terms of golf carts or any other kind of transportation from the outer lots into the core downtown, we don't currently address that within the downtown specific plan, but I can definitely speak with our public works department to see whether or not in certain circumstances, such as a large festival downtown, whether or not they could provide any kind of bus service from those outside lots into downtown itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tyra. Any other commissioners with questions? We will come back after we go to the public, but I don't see any other hands right now. So I'm going to go over. We have two people from the public that are on. Would either of you like to address the commission on this? We do limit comments to about 3 minutes, but you do have that opportunity if you'd like. I don't see either of our public members raising their hands. I'll ask the secretary, Nancy, is there anybody on the phone or otherwise indicating they'd like to participate?
There is none.
Okay, so we know that we are scheduled to have this come back to us. The slide that's up says the adoption hearings will be in the fall. We know that one of the most popular topics is parking. And Commissioner Klein has certainly talked about school district, and I think school and relationships will get somewhat talked about in the next one as well. But at this point, since I don't see any other commission hands up, I think we're largely done with the specific plan, and it sounds like we're actively moving towards getting this fairly substantial project wrapped up and ready for action on our part, and then onto the city council so we can start implementing some of the really good ideas that are here. Tyra, you always make very thorough public presentations, and I appreciate that. Our next item is 7C, which is the land development process, and I believe Albert will be making the presentation on that one. So I will turn things over to city staff for the presentation.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. This is Albert Enault, Associate Planner for the Community Development Department. From time to time, it is the interest of our department to bring informational content and educational material to the Commission as a way to help inform the Commission that they may be able to make better informed decisions for land use projects and development projects in the future. And today is one of those informal presentations about our land development process here in the city. So in this presentation, we'll go over a variety of different items in that land development process, talking about different land uses, what the city's vision is, and any guiding development documents that are used to implement that vision. Who are the stakeholders, decision makers, and what does that process look like? So we'll start off with the basics, which is, what is land development? Land development is the transition or conversion of land from its natural or semi-natural habitat or environment. You can see that picture on the left showing that natural habitat or natural environment of what it looks like a former orchard. And it's that process of converting it to a developed project or a developed parcel. And you can see the picture on the right shows what that development looks like. It went from this vacant piece of property that was formerly an orchard to the Strata 1200 apartments. So there are a few different types of land use development that occurs in municipalities. The smallest of them include homeowner improvements. Those could be garage conversions to accessory dwelling units or additions onto homes, or even second-story additions or sheds or swimming pools, those types of improvements. Second scale would involve smaller business owners where they're looking at making tenant improvements within existing buildings or adding on to those businesses to expand them, make them a little bit larger. And the third and largest involves new land development, where you're taking vacant land and converting it into larger types of specific development. It could be residential development, it could be larger retail development, such as the Nut Tree area, or it could be industrial development, similar to what's out there over off Midway and 505, the LDK warehouse project. So how does all of this get done? Well, the term for doing all of that is planning. And planning is used to establish goals and policies that help direct that future growth and development within that community. For us, it's Vacaville. And it's intended to address such issues as growth, character of development, transportation and housing needs, also economic vitality and sustainability for the projects. The whole method of planning is intended to promote public safety. It's intended to create that sense of community that people can have a self-respect and pride in for their community. It's there to improve that economic development for businesses and increase that fairness. It's there to protect public health and the environment. So we're talking about what guides that land development. Well, it starts off with city council, and the city council adopts what's called a general plan as well as a municipal code. And both of those items they play a very crucial role in casting that vision out throughout the city, and they do it through policies. And then the next step in that process is there are city staff, and that staff enforces those policies in the general plan and the municipal code to implement city council's vision. And there's a number of portions within the municipal code that's used to implement that vision. You can do it through land use and development. You can do it through health and safety. You can do it through vehicles and traffic. All of land use approvals, they have to be consistent with the general plan and the municipal code. And that's that last review process to make sure everything is consistent with what city council is casting for their vision. So there are several elements that influence land development. We talked about how city council can influence land development, but there's also general plan and zoning ordinances. There's also state laws and federal laws that influence how land development is supposed to occur, or new laws that are coming out day by day, month by month, in which planners have to be on top of and be aware of how those types of new laws will influence how land development occurs in the Vacaville. Another way that development is influenced is through housing policies and subdivision policies. How big lots can be, what's the kind of dedications that are necessary for detention basins or roadways or for parks. The Planning Commission also influences those decisions. There are specific plans and policies that influence those decisions. So there's several elements that influence how land is developed in our municipality. But where does that authority come from? Who says that the cities have this ability to make these land use decisions? Well, it comes from the California Constitution, Article 11, Section 7, where it says a county or city may make and enforce within its limits all local police, sanitary, and other ordinances and regulations that are not in conflict with general laws. So that's where the authority comes from. But with that authority comes a responsibility, and that's where California Government Code says each planning agency, they have to prepare, and the legislative body, city council, for each county or city has to adopt a comprehensive long-term general plan for the physical development of the county or the city. And any land outside its boundaries in which the planning agency's judgment bears relation to its planning, where it could potentially influence future expansion outside of its city limits. Here is our general plan, adopted recently in 2015. And the companion map is this map right here. This companion map outlines how land uses work throughout the entire city. And the general plan's vision for Vacaville is to preserve and enhance the qualities that make Vacaville a great community where we can live, work, and play, grow in a way that provides a high quality of life for all current and future residents and employees. We have a vision statement, and that 2015 adopted general plan casts the vision until the year 2035. And that vision will continue to preserve and enhance the qualities that make Vacaville a great place to live, work, and play. And these policies that are listed below are just a few that you'll see in the general plan. There are various elements that contain policies. A lot of the ones that you see below that are in green are related to land use development, such as fostering community-oriented neighborhoods that are diverse, attractive, safe, walkable, and ensuring that development adheres to the basic principles of high-quality design. Another list continued policies that are part of the general plan's vision for Vacaville. So looking at our general plan is broken up into various elements. There are 7 mandatory elements that are required by the general plan that by state law, but for us, we have 8. That is broken up into land use, housing, transportation, conservation and open space, parks and recreation, public facilities and services, safety, and noise. And we'll talk about those. Each of those particular elements contain within their own element specific policies that influence how activity works. For instance, land use contains policies related to land development. What type of communities are we looking to build? What type of expanding are we looking to do for specific areas like the east of Leisure area? Our transportation element helps guide how roadways are to be developed. What's the big width that we're looking for, these major arterials that help guide traffic through the city. Conservation and open space contains policies at preserving that open space like in Lagoon Valley or like in Old Rocky. Our parks and recreation focuses on trying to build on our parks and build better and larger parks that help serve the community. There's a safety element that focuses on policies that help protect the community by restricting buildings so that way so houses don't get built within areas that are subject to wildfires or liquefaction from soils. There's noise, making sure that homes are built far enough from the freeway or far enough from noise producing businesses like industrial uses. So there are various elements throughout the general plan that contain various policies that help influence and guide City Council's vision. So how does the general plan get implemented? Well, there are various elements that help implement, that staff uses to implement the general plan. There are specific plans and policy plans. There are development agreements. There are subdivision maps, and then there's also the zoning ordinance, and we'll go into bits of each of those items. So specific plans, those are zoning documents that implement the general plan, but for a specific area, they're required to include certain elements, and the review process is outlined by state law. So the specific plans are intended to identify how land use is supposed to work, how density is supposed to work within those areas. the location and extent of where public infrastructure is supposed to go, where your roadways, where your sewer and water lines are, how is that all supposed to be provided? It outlines development standards for those projects. Where are your buildings supposed to be located? How tall can they be? Where is your landscaping supposed to be located? It outlines conservation and open space requirements for natural features, preservation of streams and creeks or large mature oak trees that were there before the development. And the specific plans are also supposed to include an implementation component that helps identify how the financing measure is going to work for that, how the phasing is going to work for that. Are some portions supposed to be built before other portions, where the public facility is going to go, and what does that approval process look like after the specific plan is adopted? Well, the typical timeline that you see for a specific plan, processing it from submittal to approval, is about 1 to 3 years. But specific plan documents, once they're approved, they can go for a very long time. For instance, North Village, that was a specific plan that was adopted in 1995. But we have other specific plans like Bryant Landing and the farm at Alamo Creek that were more recently adopted. This map is just a graphic that outlines where those existing specific plans are. You can see Bryant Landing, Roberts Ranch, and the farm at Alamo Creek on the eastern side of the city, with Vannon Meadows and their specific plan to the south, North Village to the north, and then the current project that Tyra is working on, the downtown specific plan. This is a land use exhibit from the farm at Alamo Creek specific plan. It just is intended to depict the detailed information that is usually included in these specific plans. Information about land uses, how they're supposed to interact with adjoining land uses, separation from neighborhood commercial activities. You can see Old Alamo Creek is identified as an area that's to be preserved, and the connectivity between the parks and the roadways. So this is an example of how those specific land, some of the exhibits that are shown in those documents. Policy plans is grouped in with those specific plans. It is a separate mechanism. It is another zoning document. It's another tool to implement the general plan. Again, within a specific area. It is not identified in state law, but it's that alternative process to the specific plan. It's for properties or areas within the city limits where you're expected to see a change in land use occur or is likely to occur. And those areas can include from a few hundred to several thousand acres of land, usually processed individually or with a development agreement. Those policy plans will include permitted uses, conditional uses, development standards, phasing, information about public utilities, improvements, and how those are supposed to be installed. A few examples of those would be the Nut Tree Ranch, where you see the Nut Tree Village retail area, the Vacaville Auto Center along Orange Drive, and then Lower Lagoon Valley. This map identifies for you all of the current policy plans. There are 18 in the city. This map depicts one planning area within one of the specific within one of the policy plans. The Vacaville Golden Hills policy plan that's located south of Vaca Valley Parkway. You can see the airport to the south. And so that policy plan is broken up into 3 land use areas. You can see area 1 along 505 and East Monte Vista that has a designation of 1. And the 1 indicates highway commercial activities or land uses are preferably located in that area to help draw people off of the freeway. Your area 2 are more of the office and industrial manufacturing types of businesses. And then your area 3 are more of your heavy industrial warehousing, manufacturing. And you can tell on that aerial imagery, the larger warehouses are located within those heavier industrialized areas. You'll see that a lot of those more intense uses are located farther away from residential because they can occur with a lot more noise. Another tool to implement the general plan are development agreements. Again, in state planning law, it allows a city to enter an agreement with a developer. And the whole purpose of a development agreement is to provide certainty for the developer and the city. It provides some assurances for the developer that they can build their project as it was approved. not requiring any changes if there's any new policies. It encourages the investment and that comprehensive planning that's necessary with that specific plan or that policy plan. And it plans the best uses of resources also. Provisions to cover the cost of public facilities are also included in that DA. How are we going to pay for the roadways or for a new fire station? Those things are outlined in that DA. Those typical elements of a DA includes the term or the duration. How long is that DA good for? How long is that contract good for? They can range anywhere from 10 to 20 years. Also within that DA, you'll find there is information about density. It locks in that density so that way gives that insurance to the developer. At the time that their project was approved, they have that density locked in. So say we have another general plan update that changes the density ranges.
Albert, hold on for a sec. I see Commissioner Beaumont has his hand up, and then I have a question also. But Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Albert. Real quick, so if the state laws change, that means that these developers are grandfathered in with what they agreed to with the city?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Albert, my question, comparing a specific plan versus a development agreement, my understanding is the specific plan is adopted by the city and can essentially be changed as the city council desires, where a development agreement is a contract between the city and the developer, and it requires both parties' agreement before it can be changed. Is that correct? And I see the city manager has his hand up, so I'll turn things over to Mr. Bush on that.
So just to be clear, thank you, Chairman. So both documents, a specific plan amendment or a request for an amendment to the specific plan does require discretionary action by the city council. And in most cases, that will be forwarded to the planning commission for consideration, and then ultimately to the city council for consideration for action on the request to amend the specific plan. So it's kind of a mutual process as well, but definitely you're correct that with the development agreement, it is a contract. It does require mutual consent by both parties in order to approve an amendment to the development agreement.
Great, thank you. Before we go on, any other questions from commissioners? If not, I'll turn things back over to Albert. No hands are up. Albert, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So those typical the elements of the DA, again, mentioning the duration, the density, the provisions for public uses, and the phasing. The typical timelines for a DA can vary. It's usually concurrent with the development of a larger specific plan project. And that's usually where you'll see the negotiation occur between the city and the developer, is during that process where we're planning for the larger development, where that environmental review process is going. Other elements that are usually included within a DA include fees, like community facility district fees or community benefit contributions, special fees that are intended to help pay back specific improvements like fire stations. There's financing mechanisms like CFDs to help pay for police and fire services that will serve the area. But also important includes vested development standards, meaning development standards that are locked into place for any future development that is there with the term of the development agreement. Subdivision maps is another method in which we implement City Council's vision. It's also influenced by state law, specifically the Subdivision Map Act. And that Map Act allows cities to control the regulations that which subdivisions are designed and how those improvements are done for those subdivisions. And specifically on those improvements, we're talking about streets, we're talking about utilities, and all those other improvements that are necessary to ensure that the project or the subdivision of land is consistent with the general plan or the specific plan. The city has the authority to require those improvements. And there are various types of maps. There are tentative parcel maps that involve creating less than 5 parcels. There are tentative subdivision maps, which is splitting up a vacant land and creating 5 or more parcels. There's also a vested tentative map, which it's a little bit more complicated, so similar to the subdivision maps, but it protects against changes in development rules. That vesting term locks in the ability for a developer, once they get their approval, if there are changes to development standards that say your lots have to be bigger or smaller, they already have their approval. They don't have to change a thing. Then we have final maps and parcel maps, which is after those tentative maps are approved, they are ready to be recorded and they create those legal parcels. There are a couple of uses for maps, most notably residential subdivisions, and those are for larger scale areas like Bright Landing or Vanden Meadows or North Village, where they're subdividing a plot of land to create 200, 300 lots for future homes. Then there's also commercial development, which are subdividing those development for shopping centers or creating industrial parcels. Those are usually parcel maps. In that subdivision process, it provides the land and dedications for those public improvements, that those roads, those parks, those other infrastructures. And so it really is a relationship between the city and those developers to outline how is that subdivision going to work on the land? Is the city getting enough land that's necessary for the streets, for the sidewalk, for landscaping setbacks and medians, for turn lanes, for detention basins, for parks? That's where this is really worked out in those subdivision maps. We have those development standards and we hold the developers to those standards. This exhibit shows what that tentative parcel map looks like. You can see on this map, it was one large parcel, but they're subdividing it to create three. I think this is the hotel project that's at the corner of Vacaville Parkway in Monte Vista. So you've got your main hotel project and then two other parcels of land that will be for future commercial buildings. This is a tentative subdivision map. It's for Montesa involving, I believe, 61 lots. So they take, I believe it was 3 parcels of land and they subdivide it to create those 61 lots. You can see the dedication of improvements for the streets where they have the sidewalks and the emergency vehicle access to California Drive, and it provides access for another parcel of property that's to the south. So this is an example of a tentative subdivision map that creates more than 5 or more parcels of land. And now we are into zoning. That is the last element that we had identified in the beginning of this presentation that influences how the general plan vision is implemented. So what is zoning? Well, the zoning ordinance, it divides a jurisdiction into various land use categories. You'll see heavy, light industrial, you'll see commercial and residential land uses, areas parceled out for open space, agriculture, and scenic areas. The zoning ordinance is responsible for listing permitted uses, conditionally permitted uses in each of those categories, those industrial categories. What types of land uses are allowed within there? What types of residential developments are allowed in particular areas? It also identifies any of those accessory uses. Say you have a residential unit. Can you have a home-based business with that? Can you have a small family daycare with that? The zoning ordinance is also there to regulate the intensive uses, how much development can occur on a particular parcel of land. It also establishes those development standards, such as how big buildings can be, what are those setbacks away from the streets, what kind of landscaping is necessary, how much of the building can cover the lot, what kind of parking is necessary. I think it's as detailed as what signage is required on the buildings or on monument signs along the roadways. And it also provides those administrative procedures for variances, for conditional use permits, design reviews, and zone changes. Those are the land use permits that are required and where we review projects to compare them to what City Council's vision is. There is a companion map for our zoning ordinance, and this is that map. This is our zoning map. It outlines how those land uses are located throughout the city. Some interesting features about this map, you'll see commercial development in red, located along Interstate 80, industrial development at the north of the city in gray along 505, ease of access for large trucks to get on and off the freeway. And then you'll see a residential development kind of on the periphery of the project and some very large chunks of open space in green, like the Lagoon Valley Hills and the Rocky Hills and Caligari open space. And those are what the primary colors look like. Your oranges, yellows are primarily residential, which outlines single family. Your multifamily are more browns, dark browns. Commercial, such as red or purple, are those retail and commercial services use. So that's the designated color for that. Industrial is gray. Public institutional, which is blue, is an identifying color for schools or public buildings like City Hall, or for hospitals like Kaiser. And then your parks and open space are identified by green. So where can you find the zoning ordinance? Well, it's within that municipal code. There are 17 titles, it looks like 4 of them reserved. We're underneath Title 14 for land use and development. And if you were to open up that particular title, you'll find various divisions within that section. Division 1409 is the zoning ordinance. So what does the zoning ordinance look like? This, various chapters in which you can see the development review process that is required for any type of land use entitlement. What are those residential districts look like and the allowable uses within there? What are the commercial districts that's allowed within there and industrial businesses? You'll see on the right side various land use permits and the chapters that are used to outline what you can and cannot do. And then on the bottom right, you'll see several chapters for like performance standards, for parking standards, signage, airport standards. I see there's a question.
Yeah, this is Wendy Brecken.
Yeah, Wendy, go ahead. You have the floor.
Sorry. So I noticed that in the new code, there's overlay districts for ridge lines and hillside. And I was just wondering what was the purpose of adding those overlay districts?
Well, the overlay districts I don't know about, but I can tell you that we do have components within our municipal code that identify specific areas like ridge lines that are necessary for preservation. That's primarily identified within the telecommunication facilities chapter, where it identifies those areas throughout the city where you don't want to put them on the ridge lines. And that was, that particular chapter was adopted and intended to help protect those ridge lines. I don't know about the zoning, that component that you're speaking about, but I can get back to you with some information at the next planning commission meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, proceed, Albert.
So I'll just kind of go through some of the sections within, some of the chapters within our zoning ordinance. We start off with definitions, and this chapter identifies definitions for land uses, which you'll see retail and general merchandise, but we also identify terms like what is an accessory structure or what's a setback, so that way it helps guide how we define and how we look at development throughout the city. Another example of what you'll see within our zoning ordinance is that our tables of permitted and conditional uses. You'll see the summary of commercial of uses in commercial districts is part of one of our chapters, 1409-084 or 085, and that particular chapter identifies, you'll see on the right, the various commercial districts: downtown commercial, general commercial, neighborhood commercial, and how do those land uses work? Are they permitted with a P? Are they conditionally permitted? Or in some cases, they're not permitted because it's not a good fit, such as automobiles and other vehicle sales and service used within our downtown commercial. That is not permitted, so you won't see that in that downtown area. What you'll also see within our zoning ordinance, again, development standards. In this particular table, we have development standards for residential districts, rural residential, residential estates, high density. And you'll see the standards are intended to ensure good community design. What's the minimum site width that we know works for development? What's the minimum lot area for residential development that works for a house? That's identified in this table. What's the setback that works best for a house? You don't want it too close to the street. You want it set back a little bit so you don't, as you're driving down the street, you're not looking at a canyon of buildings. That's what's identified in this table. Those are called development standards. And when we receive projects, we compare them to those development standards, and where we're seeing that there is an issue, we require those developments to comply with these standards through what's called conditions of approval. We also have performance standards. Those standards ensure that after development occurs, that those developments continue to comply with the code. One of those examples are for like noise, transportation sources, or non-transportation sources. You might get an industrial development that is making a lot of noise. And so in addition to making sure that they're located with a good proximity away from residential development or other sensitive land uses like hospitals, we also have, what's the maximum noise that they can produce, so that way they're not being too loud for the area. We also have, performance standards on hours of operation, when can construction commence, so that way if you get a brand new subdivision, they're not starting before 7 o'clock in the morning. Otherwise, we get a complaint, and we'll use these standards to implement and make sure that there's continued compliance with this municipal code. So we have a few examples of the types of plan applications. These are land use permits that developers can apply for that are afforded to them through the municipal code. We have design reviews and conditional use permits. Those are usually there for construction of brand new buildings, industrial buildings or commercial buildings, and the establishment of land uses. Sometimes we'll get a request to modify an existing project, and that's captured underneath that modification element. Planned developments under 5 are for those larger scale projects like apartments, like the Casa de Vista apartment or Strata 1200 or the Harbison Townhome apartments. Those are captured under planned developments, where you might find a project where the developer is asking for some flexibility or some alternate standards, but they'll provide some offsetting benefits to compensate for that. That's afforded to them through that planned development. We talked about subdivision maps. We have a chapter about what guides how tentative maps can occur, what that process looks like, who's the approving authority. We also have a chapter on zone changes. If you have a piece of property that says you can only have commercial development here, but somebody wants to put residential development, what's the process for changing that zoning? What kind of application do they have to apply for? And so that's one of the applications that's also identified within our zoning ordinance. How does that work? This is intended to kind of give a picture of the types of applications that we receive. Obviously, clearly by this graph, you'll see the most popular types of land use permits that we issue are home-based businesses, people who can afford to establish a business within a commercial center, but they want to start something new and they are working from their home. Maybe they're a bookkeeper or an accountant, or maybe they're, they have a small craft business where they're working on candles or woodworking. Those are the types of permits that we issue, and there's a lot of them between 2019 and 2020. Tree removal permits, where this came in second with zoning letters. In Vacaville, we have identified that trees are a very important resource. And so before you cut down a tree, you have to get a permit in which the city evaluates, determines whether or not it's absolutely necessary. Sometimes for those big old oak trees, we'll require arborist reports. Zoning letters are common. What we'll see for those ones are when you might have a new buyer obtaining a property and they're wanting to find out what was originally approved for a property. We issue zoning letters that contain the history of the project, the approval letters for those things. And then the rest of the list, you'll see the types of applications that we receive as averages. So earlier I mentioned that it's a partnership. Land development is a partnership, and it is a good partnership that we have to continually maintain, and it involves various parties. City staff, we are here to help facilitate that communication between an applicant, his engineer and architect, and the public. We're here to help them through that process, but we're also here to hold them accountable, and we're here to work with them on interesting development projects and try to work around some really creative solutions. And we're also here to provide the public the information and help give them a voice so that way they know what's going on. So who is involved in this land development review process? Well, you've got city staff, you've got the developer, you've got the public, who are those interested parties that we notify for these land use entitlements projects. We also have other agencies. City Manager Bush mentioned that we work with other agencies through this development process. We have representatives from both school districts, Vacaville Unified and Travis Unified School District, that attend our weekly planning meetings to talk about new projects, to have their input. We have groups from Solano County Water Agency. We have an individual from Solano Irrigation District. So we're working with these other agencies to get them informed to figure out what the best planning procedure is for these projects. And we're sending them weekly emails about new development projects that come in city and asking for their input. And then the decision makers for these types of projects, the Planning Commission and City Council, they're also involved in this land development process. So what does that land development process look like? What does it look like when somebody wants to build something or somebody wants to have a brand new subdivision? Well, that is called the entitlement process. And that entitlement process is identified in the municipal code, and it kind of looks like this. You're moving along a board pace. You start off with, submitting that planning application that says, hey, I want to build this subdivision, or I want to build this warehouse building. And that application is referred to various departments. That is our project review committee. So those various departments consisting of representatives that are best equipped to help with these land use development projects, with the fire department, with public works, with traffic, with the building division, with the police department, again, with those other school agencies. We have them involved in this process. We have water agencies involved in this process. So we refer those, we disseminate information, project plans to those various entities, to those various departments. And we say, we need to get your assessment of this. Did the developer provide everything that we need to continue reviewing this project? That review has to be done within 30 days. That is required by the Permit Streamlining Act, another state law, to ensure the prompt return of comments to the developer, holding the cities accountable. Step 3, if it is complete under step 4, then we move on to what's called conditions of approval. So for projects that maybe fall short, maybe there were some design elements that developers missed, or maybe there were some design proposals that don't work and we need to bring them back into compliance with what the municipal code says, we assign what's called a condition of approval. The approval will be issued if you do this. And that's done as part of the building permit plan check process. However, if it is incomplete under step 5, well, then we issue a letter. We send a letter to the applicant and say, hey, you're missing some information, or there's a design component that isn't working. Let's sit down, let's brainstorm, let's try and figure out what's going on with this project and see what we can do to help keep this thing moving forward. And once they've had a chance to look over and have that discussion and think about things, they might resubmit it, which is what you'll see under item 6 there. Once we get past item 6, then we'll move on to item 7. Is what does that environmental review process look like? What is the impact of that project on the environment? We evaluate it. We use a number of resources, such as technical studies that are prepared by independent evaluators that's submitted by the applicant for maybe biological resources, or phase 1 environmental assessments that evaluate the soil conditions if there's any contaminants in the soil. We use those studies and various elements within our general plan to assess on what kind of impact the project is going to have on the environment. Once we figure that out, we work on noticing. We work on notifying the public. 7 goes to 8. 8 is notifying the public. The public needs to be informed about what is going on in the city. So there's a couple of different notices that we send. One is for an administrative hearing, where you have a project that doesn't require a planning commission or city council review, but we still need to inform the public. And we send out a notice, usually to 300-foot radius around the project boundaries, the property lines. Sometimes that border is altered depending on the uniqueness. It's never decreased, it's always expanded. And then for public hearing notices, those are for planning commission and city council. That's 600-foot radius. Again, never decrease. It's always expanded if we're seeing something that doesn't make sense, where we think we need to include a neighborhood here or there. Before a public hearing, we usually work with the applicant on discussing those conditions that we talked about under item 4, give them a chance to kind of look at that information, and then we prepare reports. So say it needs to go to planning commission. We prepare that report for the planning commission that outlines how it's complying with the development standards, what policies in the general plan it complies with, or what issues that need to be resolved and we need the planning commission to weigh in on. If it doesn't require planning commission approval, then it'll get the director of community development will issue an action. They'll decide to approve it or maybe modify the approval or maybe outright deny it. And then there is planning commission or city council.
Albert, hold on for a second. Commissioner Klein has his hand up. Go ahead, Brandon, you have the floor. Commissioner Klein, you're still muted, but you have the floor. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have my my office has been overtaken by little gremlins here. So I have a question about the process of amending a specific plan. I believe that Vacaville has a unique process called the merit process. I don't know if you're familiar. For example, North Village has the developer here has embarked on a amendment to the development agreement and specific plan. And I'm curious.
Sure, I can answer on that. So imagine before this entitlement process starts, say you have a very large scale project that is going to impact a very large area. You don't want a developer going through this entire process that takes lots of planning time, that takes lots of money and resources to figure out whether or not they're going to get a yes or no. So what they do is they submit what's called a preliminary application. It's for a merit hearing. It's essentially a little bit of information about the large scale proposal, but it's really intended to present it before the decision maker, for in that particular case, city council, to city council for North Village. And it's intended to say, hey, this is the big scale project that we're thinking. It's a pretty big proposal. It's going to take a ton of work. We wanted to get city council's blessing on this before we proceed. If city council says, yeah, we would like to see the more detailed information about that, go ahead and move forward with it, then they can. If city council says no, nobody wastes their time, and then they just move on with that original approval. In the case with North Village, they went through that process and asked for their permission. City council said, you know what, there is something to this. They'd like to see more detailed information about this. And the applicant proceeded on this entitlement review process where they submitted the application. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it does. I'm just curious. So if there's a finding of no merit at the end of that process, how does that play out?
Well, the determination of whether or not the project has merit is established by the decision maker before we start this entitlement process. Through this entitlement process, we're doing that very detailed analysis to determine whether the project meets the findings required for approval. So we're past that whole, does the project have merit thing when we start this entitlement process. So in the case of North Village, they went through that initial merit process, and the decision maker city council said, there is merit to this proposal. We would like to see it. We would like to see more detailed information about it.
And does that cost the developer in terms of, I guess, like, how much does something like that cost? Is there anything developers risking and pursuing the amendment process?
Well, yeah, that process is intended to provide low risk to the developer, minimum expense for really a permission to move forward with the proposal. So the application for a merit hearing, is less than $1,000 for the application to process it and prepare a staff report for city council. And the materials are whatever the materials they want. Sometimes they'll go up front and spend a ton of money on preparing plans. Sometimes they'll just have a project description, but.
And Albert, I see the city manager's hand is up, so I'm going to give him a chance to jump in right now. Go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Thank you. And I'll just expand on what Albert was elaborating on. So two things to keep in mind about the merit hearing process is that if the council decides to move forward with the merit hearing and say that there is merit to process the proposed amendment, then the applicant has to pay all the normal fees, submit all the normal documents that go along with their proposed request. So they cover all of that as part of the entitlement process. But just because the council establishes that the proposal has merit for consideration does not obligate either the commission or the council for approval of that proposal. It goes through the discretionary review process, as we've outlined here. And so the value of the merit hearing, as Albert explains, is that while the cost of the merit hearing application is minimal, should the council decide that the project does not have any merit, I can tell you that saves staff a lot of time and resources that are very valuable to be put towards other projects that we're processing. So it's a unique step here in Vacaville, but it definitely adds value, but it does not ensure that the project is approved. It has to go through that next level of entitlement and discretionary evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. And then go ahead, Albert, and continue with your presentation. Brandon, thanks for the questions. But Albert, go ahead.
Thank you. So after that planning commission or city council meeting, the project has an action, whether it's an approval or whether those decision-making bodies decided to modify that original project or whether it was denied. There is an action that is issued and that is required to be issued by state law for projects that are submitted to cities. So I mentioned that team of city departments and agencies that are utilized as professionals in their fields to help review these projects and compare them to their applicable codes. And that is termed by our project review committee. And that is our weekly development meeting with those city departments to review projects. We get those applications in and we prepare plans and referrals that contain project description letters, site plans, house plans, whatever has been submitted by the applicant. And we refer those plans to each individual member that will be reviewing those proposals. Every application is referred to PRC for group discussion. And then that step 2 in that process, as I mentioned before, is the determining whether or not they've provided everything. That's called completeness. Is the application complete? That project review committee determines, have they provided everything that's on the submittal checklist? Again, state law influencing how development occurs is we are required to identify for developers everything that they have to provide to the city for us to be able to review it and compare to the code. We have an assortment of submittal checklists that are for each type of land use development entitlement. And so prior to submitting those applications, we make sure that developers know what they have to submit. And that's what we review during that completeness phase. Mentioned before, if it's incomplete, we work with the developer on trying to get the missing information there, and they work on resubmitting the plans. And then step 4, we work on preparing those project-specific conditions. If the project can be supported, are there any conditions that need to be included in the project approval that will help bring the project into compliance with the code requirements? So we're, in addition with this development review process, we are also obligated to, as I mentioned before, evaluate how the project's impacting the environment. State law, again, here influencing how development works. We've got California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. And that is the process that's outlined and guidelines about how you're supposed to evaluate those projects. So concurrently with our evaluation, comparing those development projects to the Land Use Development Code and to the zoning ordinance, we work on this process of determining what type of CEQA document is necessary to be processed concurrently with that land use development. Following the application of a project being deemed complete, meaning that we've reviewed everything, we have everything that we need to move forward with it, the city is also obligated to determine what the CEQA evaluation is supposed to be. And there's a number of CEQA evaluations that could be assigned for it. It could be exempt from CEQA. It could be one of those smaller projects like a revision to a subdivision map where they're looking at just maybe moving a lot line over, or it could be an accessory structure in somebody's backyard, or it could be a brand new single family home that's within an existing subdivision, smaller scale projects aside. Those are projects that state legislature has determined to be exempt. They don't need environmental review. They're small enough to where they're going to have a negligible impact, and you don't have to do an environmental review. But then you'll get larger scale projects that they could have an impact on the project, but it's all going to be less than significant. The more detailed analysis that's included, that's been provided by the developer, shows that these impacts are negligible. We still want to disclose them to the public so that way the public is aware of what's going on. And that's described by that terminology, negative declaration, where there is an impact, but it's less than significant. It's not a problem.
Albert, we have another question from Commissioner Klein. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Thresholds of significance, how does that feature here?
So thresholds of significance are outlined in a couple of different documents. Those are either outlined in development standards that are within our zoning ordinance or land use development code. They can be outlined by our general plan. There might be a maximum threshold at which you expose a residential development to noise. If it's too much, then that's a significant impact. If it's little enough, then it's not a problem. But also, different jurisdictions like Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District or Solano County Water Agency have their own thresholds of significance. And so we look at those tools of what they establish through their analysis. What's a big problem? What's not a big problem? We look at those thresholds and say, would this project breach those thresholds, or are they within them? If they breach them, then you're talking about now that project is creating an impact. So that's what thresholds are, is that they establish that bar that's necessary to determine, is it an impact or is it not an impact?
Thanks, Albert. Continue.
So mentioning before negative declarations, that is...
Hold on. Commissioner Brecken has her hand up. So Wendy, go ahead.
I just was also wondering about the thresholds of significant impact, because we've had a project before where it seemed like we were just relying on a consultant to tell us whether like a health risk assessment violated a threshold, and did not go to maybe a regional or a state agency to get that reviewed if we didn't have the in-house expertise, and I'm not clear on if we do or not. So I guess I just was wanting to hone in a little bit more on that process, and maybe can we propose some changes to it?
So the process for determining thresholds of significance is, and how those methods are used to better inform whether a project is going to impact the environment. That process is already established by state law through the California Environmental Quality Act and through those CEQA guidelines. So if you have a particular scenario like an apartment project that's located in close proximity to a gas station, we don't look at whether or not an adjoining land use is going to have an impact on that project. That's CEQA in reverse. We're supposed to evaluate, does that project impact the environment? Is it going to say produce an excessive amount of air quality disturbance that it's going to affect surrounding neighbors? Would the eventual operation of, say, an industrial facility add too much air pollution to the environment? That's a specific project on the impact on the environment. So that's the way that CEQA is intended to work, not the reverse. There's a couple of scenarios where it's supposed to work the opposite way. One of them is, for instance, if you're in close proximity to an airport. Now you're looking at, would that airport have an impact on the project? You don't want to put residential development too close to a flight path. So that's one way that it works in reverse. Another way where it works in reverse is wildfires, making sure that you don't place a residential development within an environment that is potentially susceptible to wildfires. And so you can see how that environment impacts the development, but it doesn't work that way for air quality impacts.
Albert, I have a question for you related to that. If we have whether it's air quality or something else, the developer is submitting a report to us. Do you first look at, for example, the scope of the report to determine that the applicant or the consultant actually is qualified and that the assessment they're doing meets the city standards? Do the city take money from the developer and then go hire their own applicant or their own assessment company? How do you go about getting those assessments of things that aren't within staff's area of expertise?
You're right. We're not biologists, so we can't prepare a biological report. Same thing for air quality. Sometimes there's some softwares that you can use to help generate reports, but we're not experts, so we do rely on technical studies. There's a couple of ways that we would move forward with environmental analysis. One would be we would do it in-house. We would prepare the environmental document. Maybe that's a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration. And we would use technical studies that are submitted by the developer. We would look at the qualifications that are listed by who prepared them. Is it a qualified biologist? Is it a qualified or certified archaeologist? And who they are. We would look up their information. We would review their information. And we would also conduct our own site visit to look at, does what they're saying make sense based off of the site? And we use the best available information in those reports to make these calls. But for larger projects that might be more complicated in those mitigated negative declaration categories, or maybe even an environmental impact report, we do need help. And so we do reach out to environmental consultants who are professionals at doing these types of reports. And we obtain scopes of work from them about what the scale of the project would be. We send that cost of working with those with those consultants to the developer and saying, hey, we need some money for this. The developers provide the money for those environmental reviews, and we work independently without being influenced by the developer with those environmental consultants to review and look at what those reports look like. So that's kind of like how that would work.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Brecken, you still have your hand up. Do you have other comments or questions?
Yeah. So you had mentioned about CEQA and reverse, and we don't do that except for maybe fire and flight paths, but there's actual like air standards, for example, for siting next to gas stations. So those would need to have been looked at. And I would assume also water quality, for example, where you've got hazardous waste that maybe has or has not been cleaned up. So my concern is that there's maybe a way we can adjust our process so that we make sure and check all the boxes, so to speak, so that we aren't that we are looking at the whole picture, and we're looking at air and water and toxics and all those things. Because now that we're doing this infill development, it is getting uncomfortably close to that sort of thing.
So I believe Commissioner Brecken is talking about that a relationship that's necessary with other governmental agencies that are experts in their fields, making sure that they're also included in what this environmental process looks like. Mm-hmm. And so that is captured in this slide underneath the public noticing and review period. So going back up to the negative declaration, mitigated negative declaration, that describes the types of projects that could create an impact on the environment, but there are methods and mitigations that could be used to help reduce those impacts to lessen significance. There's also environmental impact reports that are used to describe projects that create significant impacts on the environment, but they can't be mitigated. But these mitigated negative declarations, negative declaration documents, and environmental impact reports, they are circulated out to the public. They are circulated out to other responsible agencies like Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District or water agencies and Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we are asking for their opinions about this analysis that we have in these reports. And we're relying on them to provide us comments. And those comments for mitigated negative declarations and negative declarations are afforded 30 days to look at those documents, We publish them at the State Clearinghouse, the Office of Planning Research in Sacramento, so everybody knows that it's been published. For EIRs, they're allotted a lot longer, a little bit longer, 30 to 45-day review. And so within that period, after the comment period, we usually do get comments from various agencies that are either asking about a particular component of the project or saying that maybe you should actually evaluate it this way or that way. And sometimes we'll go back and need to modify those environmental documents to consider what they're saying.
Again, Chair McCauley, one of the things I want to make sure we're doing properly is staying within what's on the agenda, the advertised, that we're not here actually taking actions or proposing specific amendments to the code so much as we are understanding how the process works. That probably worth if it's not already in your presentation, in the wrap up, to talk about, for example, what Commissioner Brecken was saying. If we wish to at some point change our standards, how would we go about that? Would that be something that would be initiated by the council? Would the Planning Commission have the ability to initiate a change to what our standards are, whether that's regular development standards or environmental standards? But I do want to make sure that it's clear to the members of the public, as well as to us, that tonight we're talking about the process. We're not yet at the position where we would be making specific changes. So just want to make sure we stay within the Brown Act action. I do see Wendy's hand is still up, so I'll give her a shot, and then we'll try and get things wrapped up. So go ahead, Commissioner Brecken.
I'm just trying to understand the process as well. And for a number of our projects, I think they're exempt from CEQA because we've done specific plans. Correct me if I'm wrong. If is it just specific plans? If you have a specific plan, then you don't have to, every time you have a new project, you don't have to send it out to other agencies for CEQA. Is that correct?
That's correct. So earlier in this presentation, we were talking about policy plans or specific plans. Those are larger scale projects for a specific area. What's processed concurrently with those specific plans are environmental assessments. And a lot of those projects like Brent Landing or Van and Meadows were accompanied with environmental impact reports that disclosed all those impacts to the public and that said, here are the significant impacts, here are the ones that we cannot avoid and that are just going to be what it is. And the decision makers issue approvals for the project. They adopt the specific plan, they adopt the environmental review. And subsequent projects within that scope of that original environmental review can rely on that original environmental review for meeting the purposes of what CEQA requires. And so for those subsequent projects within those specific plans, they don't need to have a subsequent review as long as that original environmental impact report disclose the impacts of that potential project.
Right. So that's, I guess that's what we have to be looking for is, have all the issues been disclosed and in the specific plan? And if not, then perhaps, I don't know, is there a way to do a mini agency review, or you have to go is it like a mitigated neg deck or whatever? Is that a way of not having to go with the whole EIR, or do you just go for a whole EIR if you have a specific plan where not all the effects have been disclosed?
Well, if you have a particular scenario where an environmental document was prepared for a project, but then say the applicant wants to come back and revise it, sometimes they don't have to go through the whole environmental impact report process. Sometimes they can do an addendum, which is a more detailed analysis about that change that's occurring, and say, well, we've done the detailed analysis, it's still within the scope of that environmental impact report. Or they can do a supplemental EIR that says, there are new impacts that are created by this change that's being proposed, and we need to circulate that for public review. And it's kind of like, that staple addition onto that original environmental impact report that's done for a project.
And Albert, again, a question on the process. If, for example, staff makes the determination that it's a negative declaration, or you're going back to a previous document, you bring it to the commission, and we as the commission, if the majority of us disagree and think that the old document didn't adequately address or is now old and out of date we'd have the ability to not approve that negative declaration because we come to a different conclusion than staff. We're not limited in our ability to do that. We have to have clear technical reasons, but if we do that, we do have that option. And even if we don't exercise it, the city council does have that option. Do I understand that process correctly?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so we do have our own ability to say not enough, and then the city council has their own. Wendy, I'll let you keep going, but if you're done, I see you just muted yourself. So I think we're probably ready for Albert to go ahead and work through these last 6 slides. I do see there's a member of the public that has their hand up, so that when we're done with the staff presentation, we will give the public a chance to participate also. But at this point, Albert, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So going back onto that public noticing review period, we do rely on other public agencies and the technical expertise that they have to review our environmental documents. Sometimes when we get technical studies and we kind of think that something's a little fishy or it doesn't make sense, we'll call up one of those agencies and ask them to do a peer review just to make sure that everything seems sound. And where they suggest changes, we usually implement those changes through the consultant. Then we have a post-approval. So once an environmental determination is adopted for a project, we're required to file a notice with the county clerk for projects like environmental impact reports or negative declarations or mitigated negative declarations. We have to file a notice of determination that the decision maker has adopted this finding or this type of environmental document for the project. And that reduces the statute of limitations from 180 days to down to 30 days. And same thing goes for environmental impact reports. I believe it reduces it down to 45 days for challenging those original determinations in court. For projects that are exempt, we would file a notice of exemption with the county clerk. Again, it reduces that statute of limitations in which independent groups can challenge cities' determination on environmental analysis down from 180 days down to 30 days for those projects that are exempt. So the evaluation of design is incredibly important through this design review process, through our development review process. There are various elements that we look at.
Wait, hold on, Albert. Commissioner Klein has his hand up. Go ahead, Brandon.
It's a quick question, clarification. So you filed that NOD with the county clerk or with OPR?
Well, I think for the environmental impact reports, you do file them with OPR with negative declarations and mitigated negative declarations. You just have to file them with county clerk.
Oh, great, thank you.
Go ahead, Albert.
Evaluation of design. Again, it's one of those very important elements, always improving on new projects that come into the city. The way that design is influenced is through our zoning ordinance, which provides the reasonable controls that staff needs and that the decision makers needs for the design of structures, for the layout of the streets. But it also recognizes the individualized nature of architecture. And it's very important to make sure that those new buildings, those new projects are compatible with adjoining developments, with overall project design. One of the other elements that we evaluate is the site design. We evaluate those plans such as landscaping, parking, and setbacks. We want to make sure that everything has a positive addition to the city's character, to the overall small town feel or that community design that we're looking for in the city. We're looking at building design to help safeguard those high quality designs that we're looking for that you'll find, say, in the Nut Tree Village. And we're trying to preserve design on details. We have other things that we're requiring for projects like four-sided architecture. So that way all elevations viewed from all areas provide a very enhanced building, a very beautiful looking building. Another element that we look at with our design review process is compatibility. We want to make sure that the site and the buildings are compatible with adjoining uses, adjoining neighborhoods, adjoining streetscapes. We want to make sure that these buildings, as you're driving up on them, they look good and they make sense and they work for circulation. Last but certainly not least, one of the most important aspects of this process is public opinion. It is required by state law. It is encouraged by staff. And we need to know what the public thinks about these projects. They are there to help give us that third-party perspective. believe we talked about this entitlement process earlier. So looking at the approval authority, we do have within our zoning ordinance tables that help guide who is in charge of approving what. We have a table in here that identifies what types of projects the Planning Commission is within their authority to approve, or what types of projects Planning Commission has to recommend to the next decision maker, City Council. And so those are identified in a table within our municipal code for the development review process. We also have a table that outlines what's within the authority of the Director of Community Development to review and to approve, or what types of projects the director has to make a recommendation to the Planning Commission on, and the Planning Commission gets to decide. So the post-entitlement process, what does it look like after a developer has run through this process to be critiqued by city staff, be critiqued by other external agencies, be critiqued by the public comments, the public noticing process, and they finally get through that hurdle and they have a good project and they get their approval from City Council or Planning Commission. What does that look like after that? Well, they are looking at trying to get a building permit. So they start off by submitting plans, more detailed plans that show how the project is going to comply with those original conditions of approval that were imposed by the decision maker, as well as more detailed plans that show compliance with California Fire Code and California Building Code. And those plans are again referred to the various departments to double check and triple check that all the revised plans that they have made comply with those original approvals that were done by the decision maker. This is a very important process. Sometimes steps are missed by the developer. Sometimes things are omitted. And that's step 2 of this process. We review the plans, again, confirming compliance with those original conditions, with those codes, making sure that they are dedicating the payment and the fees, those impact fees necessary. Once they get their permits, they can start the construction, and we have staff with building division, with planning services, and with public works that perform inspections on those projects to make sure that as they're going through the process of building the project, they are building it to what they said, what they promised they were going to build it to, and what the decision maker said they're supposed to do. And we move along with them during that process until they can finally get that final inspection and that certificate of occupancy from the city that says they've done a good job, everything looks good, and you are good to go. So that's the extent of what we wanted to cover tonight for the Planning Commission. Again, it's an educational presentation. It's helped to, again, better inform the commission, to empower them to make better decisions for these upcoming projects that they'll see in the future. That's it for the presentation. I'm here to answer any questions or field any comments.
Albert, I will start with a question kind of following up a little bit hold on, thanks, Brendan. With the question of if we looked at some of these development standards and we said they're not adequate, there should be a broader notice, there should be a tighter threshold of significance in an area. How do we go about asking for that change to be made to the development code that is then applied to the project? So that it takes City Council to initiate that? Would we have a business item to ask the City Council to do that? How would that occur?
That is an excellent question. One myself and City Manager Aaron Bush have talked about, and I believe City Manager would like to field that question.
So,
City Manager, go ahead.
Thank you. In the case like that, particularly seeing as how we're working on a project to update the development code right now, I would encourage the commission that just a couple of things. When we bring that item to the commission for your consideration, that is a great opportunity for the commission to collectively look at that document, see where there's an opportunity to make suggestions and revisions, and put forward those as a group. You have to remember that what we need is consensus from the majority of the commission, much like I ask of the City Council, before we move forward with something. So when we do bring the item before you, the development code update, I would encourage you all to become familiar with all the pieces and elements of that document. And that would be a great time to raise questions, suggestions, and then get consensus. And for those items that you get consensus on, we will absolutely present those to the City Council with an evaluation in between the commission's recommendations and when we take the item forward to City Council for their review and final consideration.
Great, thanks for the answer, and we'll just make sure that when this comes back before us, we leave enough time for, especially with a couple of new commissioners, for them to really take a look at things and bring up any concerns that they have. I see that city manager's hand is still up, so I'll let you finish up, Aaron. See if any of the other commissioners have questions, then we will go to the public. So, Mr. City Manager, you can continue with comments or questions.
Thank you.
Hopefully not questions, just comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, actually, because as my role as a former community development director, I can tell you the importance of the Planning Commission's role in this process. And for those of you commissioners that have been on the commission for a while now, you've experienced all of these different stages and steps of the process. And for those of you who are newly appointed to the commission, you can see that there's a lot. And Albert went through that process with a very large overview. There's many intricate details that are involved in this as you're learning. And it's a lot there. And I want to say that it's one of the most important things that the city can offer is a well-defined, predictable, timely, and fair process. Because we are partners in the development business, so to speak, because we don't build things. We need outside investment to come in and choose Vacaville to invest their hard-earned money into our community. And so not only is the Planning Commission actively shaping and molding what the community looks like in the form of community development, you're also directly involved in economic development. And wearing my city manager hat now, that is ultra important to the long-term fiscal sustainability of our community. Because the more outdoor private investment that we get into our town, that means better general fund revenues, which means that we get to put more back into the community for our residents, for our businesses. And so it is absolutely critical that this process is just those things: fair, timely, predictable. And so whatever we can do to, streamline and make this process more efficient and, easier to follow for the commission and for our customers, we're all about that. So thank you for this opportunity to share this with you. And we look forward to, receiving your comments and making improvements all along the way. So thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the indulgence of the commissioners. We'll have a chance for you to make any other questions or comments. I see two members of the public are here, their hands are up, and they've been up for a while. So I think I'm going to go over and give the public their chance to participate right now. I see Nancy Fletcher was the first one with the hand up. So I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you. Again, remember, things are limited to about 3 minutes. And right now it does show, good, you're unmuted. You have the floor, Nancy.
Hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very helpful. So my question actually has a couple of subparts to it. So in the presentation, you mentioned that the city works with other local agencies on projects. You mentioned that city staff disseminates the information to other agencies who might have technical expertise. So how can the public be assured that the city is actually seeking the input of the local agencies that have the technical expertise to determine the credibility of information that is submitted by either the developer or a consultant that is hired? So kind of a part B and C to that is, how does the city staff make the decision of whether they seek the outside an outside agency input? Also, if concerns are raised by the public, how do you determine the credibility of the commenter and if follow-up with a local agency would be appropriate? And finally, do you have policies that aren't in the code or some type of mechanisms, for example, that kind of discuss how you go about seeking other agencies or when it's appropriate or not? Or is the code pretty much the only mechanism for assuring a streamlined and comprehensive process.
Albert, do you want to talk about that, or should the city manager?
No, I can start on speaking on that. There's a couple parts. So Nancy, can you start off with your first part again?
Oh, sure. So how can the public be assured that the city is actually seeking the input of local agencies that have technical expertise to determine credibility that may be submitted by a developer or consultant?
So the responsibility of the city and its staff is to go to bat for the public and to review these documents and to make sure that they make sense, that they cover the aspects that are required to be covered under the California Environmental Quality Act. So we assume that the confidence is provided by the public to staff to review these documents and to consider these. If there is a question about whether or not something doesn't make sense, that's usually brought up by either the public during this development review process when we send out a public notice, or it's brought up by agency and we take a look at those. And there doesn't have to be a ton of credibility behind the individual. A comment is a comment, and we have to evaluate, does that comment have merit? Is there something that we did miss? Our professional opinion as planners and working in this field, as well as state law and the California Environmental Quality Act, obligates us to do those things, to consider other public comments and what do those mean for the project.
Right, but how do we assure that another agency is actually, that their input is actually being sought?
It's required by state law.
If there is an analysis.
Hold on for a sec. I see that the city manager, again, has his hand up. So Aaron, you have the floor.
Chairman, I can wait. I'm just wanting to get in on the discussion at the end of it, so I'll wait my turn.
Okay, then Nancy, you have not used all your 3 minutes, so go ahead.
Okay, so I just, because it doesn't always get sent out to other agencies. If there is, for instance, some type of analysis that's done to justify some type of negative declaration, then that may not go to the agency, that actual analysis that is done to make that decision. So I just was wondering how, if you guys have a process or you have a checkbox of which agencies you send these projects out to when they come, how can we be assured that these agencies with technical expertise are actually being, sought out to provide comments on something? Because if they don't know about a project, there's not going to be a comment.
Okay, there's a couple of ways that we use to ensure that these other agencies are involved. One of them is through that development review process, and that's usually incorporating those local agencies that are more impacted by a project to look at these. So those are school districts, those are water agencies within the Solano County region. The secondary process for those environmental documents, it's required by state law through CEQA. We have a list of agencies that is a checklist that says this needs to be sent to this particular group, and we send what's called a notice of availability for an environmental document. And we send letters to those agencies. We have a mailing list that we provide them to, but it also goes to the state clearinghouse. And at the state clearinghouse, all these agencies can view them and can take a look at any environmental document that is being circulated for public review by any city throughout the entire state of California.
For an EIR, yeah, that's in place for an EIR, but not for other. If you decide not to do an EIR for a project, if you decide that information that is being submitted by a developer or consultant is justification to not do one, how do we know those agencies concur with that if the analysis is quite technical?
Public circulation for these environmental documents is required also for negative declaration and mitigated negative declarations, not just EIRs.
And Albert, that does bring us to our three-minute point on that. But I think one of the things I quickly want to make sure I understand on this is that essentially we as the planning commission are a check on you and the city council, whose directly elected, and we respond to them. City council will check on us, and then CEQA and the other state laws provide opportunities for legal procedures and state agency and regional agency permits that even if we did something wrong, for example, the air district or the water quality district could refuse to issue a permit if the city did not properly refer a project to them. So there's a number of checkpoints in the system, as I remember how it works. Is that about right?
Yeah, that is correct. And just to reiterate, the environmental documents that do get circulated at the state clearinghouse and to those different agencies are negative declarations, those mitigated negative declarations that disclose that there's a potential impact, but it could be mitigated. And those other responsible agencies like the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they do receive public notices and they do receive notification from State Clearinghouse that there is a new document that's available for public review. So that's just a clarifying point.
Thanks. I see Alicia Minion has also been waiting for a chance to make some comments. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Alicia for her comments. Alicia, go ahead. Alicia, we don't see you either muted or unmuted yet, and we can't hear you. Okay, you're still, okay, you're clear. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I saw the unmute button. All right, so I have a few questions. So number one, we have that e-tracked system where we can look up a project that's, still under consideration, maybe through the entitlement process, which is great. And then I noticed that there's another sort of information provider of projects that are ongoing, not just in Vacaville, but throughout Solano County, and it's called Solano Futuro. And so I went ahead and I subscribed to it, and I noticed that it had a section for Lagoon Valley, and I was looking at it, and it appeared to have different information than what was on our website. And I was wondering, is the planning department or someone at the city communicating with the folks that maintain Solano Futuro? Do you know who's maintaining that website? Because potentially there's this third party that might be disseminating inaccurate information, and others might rely on it instead of relying on, the city's website where we have the e-tracked system. So that was one of my questions and concerns. And then also the entitlement process. And I know I was just hearing the city manager in terms of how do we expedite this process, not entitlement process, but just the development process. And I was wondering, are there standardized checklists that the staff uses, that the planning department uses? And I didn't know if those are public or if these checklists are somehow incorporated in the municipal code or in some internal policy and procedure. That was my other question. And then lastly, with regard to the last caller, Nancy Fletcher raised some good points. And I was, with regard to not necessarily the validity, but I was thinking of, to the extent a third party is necessary to evaluate something in particular about a project, whether it be, an environmental phase 1, something like that, where the third party is involved. Is it always the case that the developer hires those service providers? Because I would think that inherently they have a conflict of interest because they have a financial interest in the project. And so, and if they're the ones hiring them, I was just wondering, what steps does the staff take to ensure that that third party is actually evaluating everything appropriately? And could the staff ever sort of recommend what service provider a developer should use? That's some, maybe a third party service provider that you're accustomed to and that, you believe that is reliable. So that's another question.
That brings us right to the 3-minute mark on that.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask staff to go ahead and then respond to the points you brought up. So Albert, I don't know if you want to do that before we turn things back over to Aaron.
Sure. Yeah, I can answer that. To the first question, we're not familiar with that website. We haven't heard of it before. And we really don't control what's on other websites, but we do control and we try our best to provide as much information to the public about it. It's good to hear that you're aware of the eTrackIt portal, because that is one that we try our best to update with information about it. We also have a project page on our community development page about notable projects. We also have a separate page for public notices and for CEQA notices, so that way the public is aware of any notices that we are circulating out for those reviews. We also try our best to put staff reports and city council reports on that eTrackIt portal too. On your second comment about standardized checklists, we do try our best to help streamline projects in a very timely manner. We do have checklists that we look at. Those are submittal checklists. Those are required by state law, and those checklists are used to help ensure and to give the developer the information that we need to conduct our review. So it gives them a heads up. As long as you submit this information to us, we'll be able to deem it complete and continue on this process as quickly as possible. And those checklists are available on our website under community development. If you go to planning forms, you'll see our master planning application and the assortment of submittal checklists that are available that you can click on. They're downloadable PDFs, and you can view all the standard information that we're asking developers to provide. With regards to whether or not we utilize developers' reports, or do we recommend, for the most part, when we're working with independent environmental consultant groups that we've contracted with the city, we're having those reports prepared by that independent contract group for those larger scale projects. So that way we know that they're independent. But we're continually working with that independent contractor. So, an example would be with Stantec. That's an environmental consultant that we've worked with projects on. And once we get that scope of work done with them, we contract the types of analysis that needs to be done. Maybe there's an air quality report, maybe there's a cultural report, but that particular environmental agency works on that report. We do recommend to developers when they're asking for who should we have prepare this arborist report or this biological report or wetland report. We do make recommendations to them for our agency, for consultant groups that we regularly work with, that we have built a trusting relationship with, and we send them on their way. And for the most part, they do use those groups.
Okay.
Thanks. And now I will give the city manager the opportunity to participate. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you, Chairman. And if I could, if it's okay for protocol purposes, if I can ask Ms. Fletcher, are you with a particular agency that that has interest in development projects?
I'm not
sure
how to answer that question. So I comment as a member of the public here in Vacaville. I don't represent, I do work for public agency for the state. I am not representing them in any of my comments or questions. I have a concern about Vacaville. I have a vested interest in the city, and I would really like my goal is for the city to be the best it can be. So am I answering that question?
Yes, no, I appreciate that. And so that actually is a perfect segue to go into what I wanted to assure the commission and those listening tonight. Please know that your professional staff have the very same interest, okay? As Albert shared with you near the beginning of the presentation, you see the general plan vision and all the statements in there. And there's a lot, and it's all about building a high quality community. And I assure you that every person at City Hall, and especially in our planning departments and in all of our other departments that work directly on development projects, are tasked with and are trained at making sure that the project is successful. that it is of the highest caliber quality, that it meets all of the requirements from not only just an environmental standpoint, but from a design standpoint, from a legal standpoint. That's our job. And I make sure that all of our executive team and all of their representatives in their respective departments are doing just that. And so we're not trying to make any shortcuts. We're trying to ensure that we establish a high level standard, that good quality development comes into the community and adds value. The way we do that is making sure that our processes are efficient. We can't offer things other than time and predictability, but that is of value to a developer. And any developer will tell you that what they need from a city is predictability and efficiency and timeliness. And so if we can make sure that our process is just that through very strict checklists, through very progressive and proactive development reviews, through planning commissions that are dialed into the vision and seeing what the expectations are with our development standards and all, those all play a part into that. And so I just wanted to reiterate that we're not doing this just for the sake of doing it because a developer submits an application. It truly is a partnership. And honestly, when we hold that higher standard like that, the developer recognizes it and will come back because they know that if we're putting them through all those hoops, through all those high standards, well, guess what? That means that their neighbor who has a vacant piece of property has to go through that same process, and that they're going to be sure to have high quality development built next to them. So it's quality begets quality. And that's how you get repeat customers. That's how you get more investment. And that's how we ensure great quality projects. So that's all I wanted to share with you in terms of ensuring that, and Albert got into all the technical parts. We are obligated by CEQA. And I would offer to you and anybody else out there listening that if you have questions about how we are routing our projects and who we are involving, come down and take a look at the file. It's all in there. It will tell you who we've sent it to. It will tell you who responded and what their comments are. It's all there for anybody to take a look at. So thank you.
Yeah. And just
thanks, Aaron. Hold on. So I know we're right at the limit, and I want to make sure we fairly quickly close the loop on this, and then I'll check and see if there's any other members of the public that Nancy has waiting. But go ahead and do any quick wrap-up comments that you might have in response to the city manager's question, Nancy. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the work that all staff do. As I'm, someone who's a public servant myself, who's worked for various different agencies, I understand the dedication and hard work, and it's often a very thankless job as well. So I definitely understand that. So my comments were in response to a project where I participated in, and I felt there was a hole in the process. I'm trying to figure out how to fill that hole to make sure that the public health of every citizen of Vacaville is protected. And that is my goal, plain and simple.
Well, I will tell you what, Nancy, I'm filling in as the acting director. And if you would like to have a conversation with me at some point in time, or the future director, either myself or the new director will be happy to sit down and talk to you about your concerns.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Aaron. Nancy, do we have anybody on the phone or otherwise indicating that they would like to participate from the public?
There is none.
Okay, and since our two members that were logged on have both had their opportunity, I'm going to return things to the commission. We've had a very thorough discussion of this item. Are there any follow-up comments or questions? I see Commissioner Beaumont's hand is up first. Doug, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, I think I understand, but if there's an outside consultant, does the developer pay for that or does the city pay for that?
Albert?
The developer will pay for that.
And do they pay the city and then the city hires them, or do they pay the outside consultant directly?
They pay the city puts it in an account and gradually pays the consultant as they're performing the work.
Okay. Commissioner Beaumont, did that answer your question?
It most certainly did. Thank you very much.
Okay, I see Commissioner Klein has his hand up. Brandon, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Albert. As usual, excellent presentation. Very, very well done. I do have a question, a couple of questions, I guess. If you can clarify when does the county clerk get involved versus the clearinghouse? Because the issue here to me is about public notice. And so if I'm logging into the OPR state clearinghouse to see a notice of determination, would I always see the determination of a project in NOD there, or would there also be times when the county clerk would be where I would be logging in?
You're also going to be looking at the county clerk's office because CEQA guidelines don't require MNDs and NDs to file a notice of determination with the Office Planning and Research.
And so are we putting those mitigated negative declarations on our website as well?
Yes.
Okay. And so the public would presumably have notice there.
Correct.
Okay. And so as to the coordination with schools, what we talked about earlier is that the schools are notified as just a gesture of sort of cooperative planning. But if in the case of like a merit hearing, when do the schools get involved there if you're talking about a adjustment that would directly impact whether or not a school is built?
So for those merit hearings, if you look on the slides that we had presented earlier, that project review committee, we bring every project to that committee, which consists of various departments and, for instance, a representative from the school districts. And so even if it's a merit hearing, we bring that information, that proposal to that group and get their feedback and put that information that we've received. Does it work? Does it not work? Here are the areas of concern. And that information is put in a staff report for the decision maker.
I guess my concern here is that there's not a, and this is not directed at anyone in particular, but when nobody owns when there's not one person that's accountable for something, then really nobody owns the outcome. And so my concern here is that the schools don't have any direct line of accountability for whether or not a school is built or not. So our general plan says all these wonderful glowing flowery languages about schools, but there's no actual leverage that we have over whether a school is built ever. Even if we pass a bond, the school may never be built. So my question directly is there a point in our process where we can actually get yes or no about whether or not a school is constructed?
And in this one, since we're talking about two interagency relationship with two different elected bodies, I can ask the city manager to jump in on that because both the city council and the school board are different elected bodies. So I'm going to ask Aaron to participate here.
Thank you, Chairman. So couple of thoughts on this particular one. So with regards to the specific example that Vice Chair Klein mentioned, when we have an existing condition and it's being proposed for merit hearing or modification or whatever, again, I need to reemphasize what Albert is sharing with you. We absolutely involve the school district. Okay, so there's two issues that I hear that are coming from the questioning. One, do we involve them? Absolutely. Okay. We make sure that they're involved because here's the thing: if we miss, then we're left holding the bag. And so I want to make sure that we're talking to everybody that we need to talk to that's involved in the project. Now, whether or not there's accountability, that's a whole nother matter. And that is something that I was going to mention later on in the director's report, and I'll touch on it just real briefly right here, is that now we're talking about working with the subject matter expert, in this case the school districts, on how are you providing or meeting the demand for your services. And I will share with you that I am actually facilitating or part of a facilitation group with my cohort over there at the superintendent of schools. We're working on a 3x3 at the policy level with the representatives from the school board, as well as 3 representatives from our city council, to talk about those very policy issues. So, that is something that we are working on the big picture at the council level. And as things come from that, we will be certain to share that with the Planning Commission and anyone that's interested in that subject. But there is, as it stands right now, if you look at all the different projects, the specific plans that Albert shared with you on the map exhibit, we have environmental impact reports that say schools will be provided. The timing is something that is I know is of concern, and that's why we're putting this 3x3 together to see how we can help facilitate something happening sooner than later.
Thank you, Aaron. I see, Mr. Klein, you're still have the floor, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. I'm glad to see that there's action here, because we've got to provide an answer to our neighbors about what's happening with these schools. They see all of these, and listen, I paid attention to this presentation when it was given to the council, and they had the exact same concerns. That there seems to be a disconnect in Vacaville as to housing construction and school construction, and the two seem to be woefully disconnected at the moment. So I'm eager to see a solution there, and my neighbors are talking to me about it. The council's talking about it, and nobody seems to have any answers. So Aaron, we have a lot of trust in you, and I'm glad that you're on top of it. My other question really kind of goes to the equity issue, and I'm curious as to the type of outreach that's happening with underrepresented communities. Is there a process for engaging underrepresented communities separate and apart from the current process that you described?
Again, since this seems like it's a citywide issue, I'll ask the city manager to address it.
Yeah, and I would just caution that this is kind of off topic of this particular agenda item. And I think, if you'd like to, I would recommend that if that's an area that you would like addressed, that, maybe you can bring that up during commission comments for, a possible future topic for discussion. And if that be the case, I would encourage you to, if you could, give me some more specifics of what exactly you're looking for, so that we can provide you with a detailed response at an upcoming meeting, if the commission's agreeable to that.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Do we have other commissioners that have comments or questions they'd like to make at this point? I don't see any. I see Commissioner Brecken's hand is up again. So Wendy, you have the floor.
Hi. Yeah, my question's also to Aaron about schools. And I just think that it would be good to know before approving a project, both for the Planning Commission and maybe also for City Council, more detailed responses to the question of, is there capacity in the school or in the district? So, because our question, according to the general plan and this process, the land development process, is we want family-friendly, community-oriented projects, and that would happen maybe if there's, maybe we would want to know, are there a couple schools in the area that are available to the kids? Are both those schools next to the project at capacity, and are they going to be commuting across town? I think that might make a difference on whether a commissioner thinks the general plan has been met or not, whether we meet the strict rule of the general plan. Is a school that is, if we're having to commute from, North Village to Alamo to go to school, maybe we're not meeting the scope of the general plan. So I guess that's maybe a legal interpretation. I'm not sure, but we're talking about vagueness like family friendliness and community and things like that. But I think each commissioner might be defining that on its own. So I would think we need, for future projects, to know the detail of whether there's capacity in the district. We'd want to know where in the district.
Mr. City Manager, any additional follow-up on that?
Well, so again, I want to be respectful to the agenda item, but if the city attorney will indulge me just for a brief moment, this is an important topic. But I do want to just suggest that the commission consider that, well, let me back up and do this. So there's the reality, there's the perception, and then there's everything in between, right? And so from a project approval standpoint, if a development project is complying with the terms of the agreement, the specific plan, the development agreement, the subdivision map, and everything that goes into, that project, there's an obligation to move forward with that. Now, what we get into is the whole timing issue and capacity, and student populations ebb and flow throughout the community as the populations age, and new communities are built and everything. And that's something that we're talking to the school district about, to show us, just exactly what's happening. We need to tell the story. And that's exactly what I told the 3x3 committee is that people are left out there guessing right now as to, and coming up with their own thoughts about what is going on out there. So that is something that the 3x3 group is working on, is getting the story out so that we can update the community and everybody involved, including the commission, so that we're not guessing or speculating what's really occurring out there. But I will say that, going forward, we will, keep the commission updated about that. But until I have, some idea of where the 3x3 is going, we're still under the requirements of making sure that projects that are consistent with all of the rules and regulations of the city are, and meet the findings, that we move forward in the proper manner with their processing of their projects. So I hope that answers or addresses your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Do I have any other commissioners that have questions or comments at this time? I don't see any hands or any mics that have gone off of mute. So it looks like we've come to the end of this particular item. And thank you, staff and commissioners, for some very detailed discussions, both on downtown and on the land development process. And we know that both of these will be things that come back to us. We're now moving on to agenda item number 8, which is status reports on development and major projects. And I know we're scheduled to have building and then advanced planning and then current planning. And I'll simply turn things over to staff to present as appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. So regrettably, I don't have an update from our building division other than they're very busy. There's lots of new projects under construction, so which means lots of inspections and lots of plan checking. But we'll make sure to have a complete update for you at the August meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to Tyra, who will give you a quick update on some of the advanced planning items. And then following that, we'll have Albert give you an update on some of the current planning projects.
Good evening, Commissioners. So to give you an idea what the Advanced Planning Division is working on, I wanted to note that even though we did continue tonight's item on VMT and our energy conservation action strategy, these documents, along with our supplemental EIR, are currently available for public review on the city's website. Simply go to cityofvacaville.com, look under the news items, and there is a direct link to all those documents. This item is tentatively scheduled to be brought before the Planning Commission in August, and it will be followed by the City Council meeting in September. So you've already heard what we're currently working on in regards to the downtown specific plan. I will be coming back to the Commission to further discuss both schools and parking next month. In addition to that, we are currently working on the Green Tree Project. Staff has recently received the draft specific plan and design guideline document. Staff is currently reviewing this document, and we are preparing comments to get back to the developer. In addition, staff has also met with the Leisure Town liaisons, and we have reviewed the site plan with them. We gave them a copy of the site plan to share with the Leisure Town HOA. Lastly, we are currently working on 2 grants with the Parks and Recreation Department. One grant I'm sure you've already heard of. It's the grant associated with public art on the Rocky Hill Trail. The other grant is a new grant. It's called Our Town Grant. And this grant, if we were to receive it, would provide matching funds to install a public art component to our downtown. As a requirement of this grant, we do need to partner with a cultural or art nonprofit group. And the city is currently working with the Yoko Dehe Wooten tribe to see whether or not they'd be interested in partnering with us to install an art installation somewhere within our downtown. That grant is due back to the grantor in mid-August. Finally, I do believe I've mentioned this previously. The city is in the beginning process of getting a scope of work put together for our upcoming housing element update. That project will also include the creation of environmental justice element policies, which more than likely will not be a standalone element of the general plan. Instead, it'll be a series of policies that will be placed into the most appropriate general plan elements. So that's to say, if it's a land use policy as it relates to environmental justice, it'll be located in the land use element. Lastly, as a requirement of the housing element update, we will be looking to update our safety element as well. So that'll be a project that the Planning Commission can expect to see in the very near future. And that concludes what Advanced Planning is currently working on. Thank you.
Albert, you're up next.
Hey, thank you, Chair. So for our June activity, we had, I'll go by district, some activity in District 1. There were no new projects, but we are seeing quite a bit of activity. There were 28 plan reviews that we did. For Home 2 Suites Hotel, we also reviewed the Aviator Warehouse building at Monta Vista and Aviator. We also are going to be seeing Lister Commercial Building that's located next to the storage facility on Monta Vista and 505. And then we're seeing some tenant improvement work over at the Amazon building at 4800 Midway Road. In District 2, we're seeing activity with the Play for All Park going forward with plan reviews. Some house plans for Roberts Ranch Village A, that's the Wild Hawk development by KB Homes. And then over in Brighton Landing, we're still seeing continued house development over there in District 2. District 3, we received a new project, the Merchant Street Office Building. It's a design review request to construct a new 4,600 square foot single-story office building on a vacant 0.14 acre parcel of land located on Merchant Street, south of Dobbin Street. Within District 3, we reviewed some plan checks, most notably a Raising Cane's restaurant at 160 Nut Tree Road. So we've been seeing some activity occurring with that restaurant. District 4 was pretty quiet with some residential swimming pools and accessory structures. District 5, though, we did get a new project for the Lower Lagoon Business Village. They are looking at modifying that business village. They're proposing to make some changes. They want to revise the maximum building floor area to include an additional 166,000 square feet for manufacturing. They want to increase the maximum floor area for each store from 35,000 square feet to 100,000 square feet for each story. And then they want to relocate the townhomes closer to the town center. So this information and the project plans are available on the eTracker portal. You can view the plans there and the description of this new project that's been submitted and being evaluated by staff. In District 6, we received 3 new projects. Morningside at Vanden Meadows, Richmond American Homes is proposing some new house plans, 4 house plans on 75 lots, and villages 1A and 1B in the Vanden Meadows area. So the villages at Vanden Development. We also received the resubmittal for the Alamo Creek subdivision. That is the high density parcel that's located off of Leisuretown Road and Redstone Parkway. The request for that is a plan development and tentative map request to subdivide that 9.91 acre site into 131 lots for duet style housing. So that's what's on our plate for that particular project. We're reviewing it. And that is the kind of project that would require Planning Commission review and approval. We also received a modification for a Verizon cell tower that's at the Arlington Park at 501 Foxborough Parkway. And then during June, we helped serve about 82 inquiries, development-related inquiries over the phone and at the front counter, and performed 58 inspections during June for mainly single-family homes. That's it for current planning. That's our activity for June.
Thank you. Do I have questions from any commissioners on staff before we go on to the director's report? I see no hands coming up on that. So I'm going to go on to the city manager / acting director for the director's report. Aaron, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so item A, city council actions. So we had a couple occur since your last commission meeting. At the regularly scheduled June 22nd city council meeting, the council approved the final map for the farm at Alamo Creek final map. That is the large lot map that creates future parcels to be subdivided into future subdivisions, as well as the lots for parks and open space areas. They also approved the second reading of the cannabis ordinance, and then they denied the Nut Tree Food Mart determination of public convenience or necessity. They also had a couple of special study sessions. The first one being on June 29th, where they received a very similar presentation to tonight about the land use, the land development process. And then subsequently on July 6th, we presented them with a Housing 101 presentation, which I'll talk about in just a minute, a little bit more. So I think that's it for all the city council actions that relate to the Planning Commission. In terms of the next few items coming up on the Planning Commission, I think we have a couple. Apparently we're taking, as a side note, we're taking the downtown specific plan to the Airport Land Use Commission meeting at their August 13th meeting. And then when we meet in person, by the way, on August 17th for the Planning Commission meeting, again, that's your first in-person meeting. We will be discussing things related to possibly the Hampton Inn project, the VMT and ECAS, EIR, as well as more than likely an update to our zoning code. Those are the items that we have for you on that one. Now moving on to item C. So Albert, if you can pull that up for me, I'd appreciate it. So I know at the last meeting, there were quite a few commissioner comments about a few items, and I just wanted to touch on those so you didn't feel like we were leaving you hanging on that. The first one was, a desire for forming subcommittees of the Planning Commission to make recommendations to the Planning Commission and possibly ultimately to the City Council. And what I want to do is just kind of address those subjects and then just the whole process for forming subcommittees. So keep in mind, that the Planning Commission role is to help the City Council with the approval of land use projects. And so the policy actions of the city are those responsibilities of the City Council. And so when we go through some of these items, some of these things are more operational in needs and others are policy. And so with regards to schools, for example, how do we help ensure the construction of new schools? And I know that there was several references to our general plan policies and everything. And again, we kind of touched on that earlier. We are coordinating a 3x3 between City Council and school board representatives, along with the superintendent of schools and myself as a city manager, to talk about things such as what is the demand, what is the need, where are the locations, and what are possible funding options. So we're looking at all those things. And again, we'll make sure to keep the commission and the community informed about that. There was another item on there about prioritizing the list of projects, specifically capital improvement projects, as well as the Parks and Rec Master Plan. So the projects that are included in the CIP, I will just say that those, we're required to take that CIP project list to the commission to ensure that it's consistent with the general plan, as I'm sure you were made aware of when we brought that forward to you. The projects on there, while some of them are, fun projects, I'll call them, related to parks or, other, facility improvements and things, the majority of those items are really just operational needs. Buildings need maintenance. We need overlay street projects. We need to drill a new well, those kinds of things. And so those are prioritized based on the department's needs when we put the budget together to make sure that city services and facilities are operating at peak efficiency and at peak levels to meet the demands of our community. And so those are the experts that are putting those projects in front of me to recommend approval to the council based on their need to provide maintenance and other things. So in terms of getting assistance on those, I don't know that that's really needed or warranted. With regards to the park improvements, for the commission's benefit, I will share with you that as part of the approval of the Park and Rec Master Plan that I believe was shared with the Planning Commission as part of that process, the council asked that we form another 3x3 group comprised of representatives from the City Council and representatives from the Parks and Rec Commission to evaluate the major park priorities. And so when we did the study session for Measure M funds, one of the things that we outlined for the City Council was all the different park projects that were included in the Parks and Rec Master Plan by price point. And so I think we had upwards of 10 projects that were, over the 10 or $15 million mark. And, it would be nice if we could afford them all, but when you add them all up, it's upwards of, $200 to $300 million. And so, the way those parks get funded is a combination of developer impact fees, could be, grant funding, could be, turnkey park projects that we work with the developer on and, in our development agreement process. It could be Measure M funding. And so what this group is going to be doing is evaluating those major projects and, coming back with recommendations to the commission, the Parks and Rec Commission and the City Council to say, what is the biggest value? What is most important? What is the highest priority for the community? So that is something that we'll keep the Planning Commission informed of as that effort progresses. In terms of timing, not sure when that is right now, because if you watched the budget approval process, which included the wrap up of Measure M, we have a very aggressive schedule and a very aggressive plan to work on more than 6 projects, park projects, renovations, one in each district. And then in addition to that, we're also putting sports lighting in ball fields and helping with the completion of the Play for All Park. So we have a very aggressive park plan this year. So this other might take us a while to get to, but we'll keep you updated. The other one was the streamlining the processes and examine how the flow of our projects work. Well, we kind of, went over that a lot tonight, but as we've kind of touched on during the presentation, especially when we had some public comments about how do we ensure things, and again, going back to this development process being a partnership to ensure that we're getting high quality projects and so forth. It's an effort that I actually started when I was the assistant city manager at evaluating everything we do and working with everybody in the organization that touches a development project. And so there's 1,000 moving pieces to that process. And so I assure you that this is an ongoing effort that we're looking at because it's in our best interest to work smarter, work more efficiently, and produce a higher quality project. So that is something that staff will be working on. And kind of a segue, I will share with you that in speaking with who I hope will become your new community development director soon, is very well versed in those process mapping efforts and will be a good addition to help us with that effort. The last item on there for a subcommittee was exploring a committee for possibly becoming a charter city, which could free us up regarding certain laws that we must follow. And so, again, this is definitely a policy level matter that requires council direction. It's not easy to become a charter city. I've been through that process before, and it can take multiple years to do. And really, you need to figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish that you can't accomplish as a general law city. And so that would be something that council would have to explore and direct me as a city manager to versus the acting community development director to look into more. The second item that was brought up was study sessions, looking for more of a hands-on role in getting stakeholders and more public involved. I would say that we're open to suggestions as your staff. What we tried to do tonight was give you an insight to some tools that we think will help you in your role as a planning commissioner, be successful in your role as a planning commissioner. If there's interest in other topical subjects, we can feel free to make those suggestions. And if we feel that they're, helpful to you in your role as a commissioner, we can certainly explore, putting that together. And finally, kind of related to that item, there was a discussion about affordable housing and what's going on in that regard. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to take a look at the City Council special meeting on July 6th. There was an excellent presentation made by our Housing and Community Services Department on the whole issue of Housing 101. And it also talks about in that presentation about the housing strategy that the city is undertaking, which is going to be a very interesting and very thorough evaluation of how do we make housing work here? What are the new needs? What are the new demands? And how do we make those things happen? So we can, send you out the link to that, or you can simply look up the item on the City Council page. There were a couple of other items that came up that I didn't have room for on the page about 5G infrastructure. We did pass an ordinance a while ago for our muni code, recognizing that new infrastructure improvement. So that is coming, but at this point we have not received any requests for encroachment permits or any other permits to install that type of infrastructure in our community just yet. And then lastly, we were being courted by Cracker Barrel, but unfortunately they have found another location at this time. That's not to say that they're not poking around still at a later date, but we do have some other exciting projects that we're working with our economic development department on. And so I would encourage you to stay tuned, and just as soon as we can share that with you, we'll be happy to do that. And I guess the final thing is, I kind of already touched on it, is that we are actively finalizing the offer for our new community development director. And just as soon as I have that button up, I'll be able to share with the commission the details of this individual and all that they will bring to you and our department and the organization to help make Vacaville a great community. So with that, I think that concludes my my report. Thank you, Chairman.
And I'm looking forward to our ability to stay tuned in person starting in our August meeting. I think a number of us are looking forward to being in the same room together. Before we go on to simple comments, are there any questions that commissioners have for the city manager / acting director? And if not, then we will go on to commissioner comments, a chance for commissioners to briefly bring things up before we go to adjournment. Commissioner Klein has his hand up. Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, I was just asking a question of the acting director about the 3x3 on schools. I'm curious when that was organized and what the scope of the group entails.
Well, that is something that has been traditionally in place, and then it would have, it would be pretty proactive, and then it would settle in at times with the new council. There was a desire to reactivate it, to discuss all those topics that I mentioned in terms of, the demand, the supply, the financing, and all kinds of other things. But that is something that is established between the representatives from the council as well as the representatives from the school board. There is no set specific topics. It's something that group electively identifies, and hopefully it's something that will continue going forward. I know that when I was first put in my new role, one of the first things I did is reached out to the superintendent of schools so that we could, reestablish those relationships, because it is a very important key element to building community.
Thanks, Aaron. Other things under commissioner comments that anyone wishes to make right now? Aside from my compliments to the now retired Mr. Baderi, with the quality of staff that he has left behind, as shown by the presentations tonight, I think that's definitely a tribute to the work that Fred did. Detailed, long but detailed, good presentations, I thought, by everybody that was involved. Brandon, I see you unmuted yourself again. Do you have something more you want to say under commissioner comments?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the importance of trying to get a handle on this issue with the schools. And I think that I'm just confused about where these issues are cropping up, because I listened to the special meeting of the council where the city council seemed very confused about the context of these developments that are coming up. I think one councilman said that he doesn't care if one more house is built. He just wants to see something happen with the schools. And it seems like there's a lot of confusion around this issue. And I think that if you're taking the specific plan as an example, the comments in the draft specific plan about schools is sort of endemic as to the issues that we're living with here. It's characterized as opportunities and challenges in the specific plan. It says, I guess if you just look at the specific plan draft around the schools, it's confusing as to who does what. And there's language in the specific plan, draft plan, about allowing for additional residential growth in a more urban environment and the challenges that it poses. And then it pivots suddenly to that the Vacaville Unified School District is faced with the challenge of transporting students to more distant schools. But Vacaville Unified does not transport students to schools. They don't provide busing. I'm not sure what they're talking about there. They're not planning on building another school. So I guess if there's a 3x3 that's been going and everything's going wonderfully, I'm confused as to how that fits in the comments that I heard from the city, from the council meeting when the planning issues were addressed. And I heard from a number of council members that they're confused about what's happening in the schools, and they want to see this issue addressed. So as to the idea that one of the commissioners brought up at the last meeting about subcommittees, and if we're looking at schools, I think that this is a issue that is urgent for me and others who are just trying to see Vacaville be a place where parents can raise a child and have neighborhood schools as is promised in the general plan. And I think that that's a very simple command, that you expect neighborhood schools that your kids can walk to. And expecting your kids to get to a car and drive and have no community is not the kind of place that you want to raise your kids in. So I think that each of us that lives here and is trying to raise a family needs to evaluate for yourself, what can you do to make this a place where innovation and community is prioritized. And I think that for me, if that means that we have a subcommittee on the planning commission that is just focused singularly on schools, I'm all about that. And I really want to see that outreach happening. And I want to understand whether or not the schools are planning, whether or not Vacaville Unified is planning on building a school to match the demand, because the general plan specifically references neighborhood schools. So that's not a complicated proposition, and I'd like to see that addressed. So I'm eager to learn what happens from the 3x3, and I'm a very patient person, and I'm willing to see what happens. But I'm glad that the commission is that certain members of the commission are interested in seeing a subcommittee on schools, and I think that's something that is definitely within the scope of our planning imperative. It's in the general plan, and I'd like to see it happen.
Commissioner Brecken, you have your hand up. I'll give you an opportunity now. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah. Thank you. And I want to thank the city manager for all his hard work and comments, in addition to staff. As far as the school issue, there are a number of city council members that are very focused on this issue. And it might, even though you're starting with a high level 3x3, it might end up being a good idea to maybe have, a couple, 2-3 commissioners, 2-3 city council people, and maybe some staff from the school district as well. Because just in my own experience with agencies, if you're just dealing with high level, then maybe there'll be a disconnect. But like, so if the staff at the school district is not doing a good job, or if they're not communicating enough with the superintendent of schools, then maybe everything won't be, I mean, this is a crucial, kind of critical issue, and I just think that the more communication, the better. But in addition, other communities have CFDs for both services, you know, police and fire, as well as for schools. So I'm just putting that out there as well. Thank you.
So I'm gonna recommend, I know we're looking at, with a new director coming on hopefully in August, that to make sure we're within the Brown Act of actually taking actions on things that are on the agenda, that in September, October, we actually ask for a business item where the Planning Commission has an opportunity to actually take actions on either forming or asking the City Council to invite us to join in various committees. So that way we're moving out of the general commission comments to where we can actually take actions and go for a vote. So Aaron, that's a couple of months down the road. I know you've got a really full dance card, but that is something that I'd like for us to see agendized in the moderately foreseeable future. And before I go back to the city manager for chance for any comment, I do want to make sure, since we're under commissioner comments, that we see any other comments that members of the commission might have at this point. And I see Commissioner Beaumont's hand is up. And Wendy, if you're done, could you please go ahead and drop your hand? Doug, you have the floor.
Yeah, Chair, I would just say that we're all under a one-year appointment, and that's going to be a lot of changeover come March or April. And so all these great things that are happening, that we have all this background, there's going to be lost because a lot of us are going to be gone. That's my only comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Beaumont. Any other commissioners have comments at this point? Commissioner Aldrich, go ahead.
On a much lighter and completely off the topic, and being a born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I'd like to announce that for the first time in 50 years, the Milwaukee Bucks won the championship tonight, and I'm quite proud of that.
Woo-hoo.
It has nothing to do with the Planning Commission, but I have to brag.
Any other last minute sports trivia before we wrap up?
That's it.
Aaron, anything that you need to say, or do you have for the moment enough direction and we're ready to close up?
Well, I appreciate the commissioner's comments, and certainly I appreciate the interest in making sure our community is high quality and meets the needs of all of our residents and businesses and everything. I will just again echo though that duplicating efforts when the council is still figuring out the big picture conversation. I can't make any promises to the commission on what that looks like because they are still working with the board on that particular subject, but we'll be prepared to bring something back for discussion with the commission at a future commission meeting.
Great. Thank you very much, Aaron. And with that, we are concluded for the meeting of Tuesday, July 20th, 2021. We will see you in person in a month. Good night, Vacaville.